Clara Whitmore stood at the altar in a dress that didn't fit, staring at the stranger she'd just married to save her family from ruin. The whole town whispered behind their hands, mocking the fat bride sold to the mountain man like livestock. But when Boone Callahan's rough hand touched hers, she didn't see disgust in his eyes. She saw something far more dangerous: recognition. This is their story, how a woman society rejected and a widower the world feared built something no one expected in the frozen heart of Blackstone Valley. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The morning Clara Whitmore became someone else's property. The sky above Blackstone Valley hung grey and swollen with snow that refused to fall. She stood in front of the cracked mirror in her childhood bedroom, staring at a wedding dress that had belonged to her mother, a woman half her size, from a time when the Whitmore family actually had something worth celebrating. The fabric pulled tight across Clara's shoulders and stomach, the seams straining with every breath. Her cousin Judith had tried to let it out the night before, working by candlelight until her fingers bled, but there was only so much thread could do. "It'll have to work," Judith had whispered, tying off the last stitch. "There's no money for another." Clara hadn't answered. There was no point. Now she traced the unfamiliar reflection in the glass. The pale face, the dark circles under her eyes from 3 sleepless nights. The brown hair pulled back so tight it made her temples ache. Behind her, through the thin walls, she could hear her father pacing in the hallway. Back and forth, back and forth. The floorboards creaking under his weight with the rhythm of a man waiting for execution. "Clara," his voice came rough through the door. "It's time." She closed her eyes. 24 years old, and this was what her life had become? Not a bride, a transaction. The church was freezing when they arrived. St. Catherine's had never been warm. The old stone building squatted at the edge of town like something that had grown from the frozen ground rather than been built by human hands. Clara's breath came out in clouds as she walked down the aisle on her father's arm, each step echoing in the silence. Every pew was full. Of course it was. The whole valley had turned out to watch Samuel Whitmore's daughter get married off to settle his debts. It was better than theater, cheaper than a traveling show. Clara could feel their eyes on her like hands, touching, assessing, finding her lacking the way they always had. "Poor thing," someone whispered. "Did you see how tight that dress is?" "I heard Callahan paid $500. Lord, he overpaid." Scattered laughter, quickly muffled. Clara's father's grip tightened on her arm. Whether in comfort or shame, she couldn't tell. Probably both. Samuel Whitmore had been a proud man once. Before the drought killed his cattle and the bank came calling. Before he'd gambled away what little remained on a hand of cards that should have saved everything, and instead destroyed it. Now he was walking his only daughter down the aisle to marry a stranger, and everyone in Blackstone Valley knew exactly why. At the altar, Boone Callahan waited. Clara had only seen him twice before. Once at the lawyer's office when the arrangement was made, once in the street 3 days ago when he tipped his hat to her without speaking and kept walking. Both times she'd been struck by his size. He stood well over 6 feet, with shoulders that seemed to fill doorways and hands that looked like they could snap fence posts in half. He was 35, 11 years older than Clara. Unmarried, for reasons no one seemed to know, though the women of Blackstone Valley had plenty of theories. Too mean, too rough, too strange. He lived alone in the mountains, ran cattle on land so remote most people had never seen it, and came to town maybe 4 times a year to buy supplies and sell beef, the kind of man who didn't need other people. Until now, apparently. Clara forced herself to look at him as her father handed her over. Boone Callahan's face was weathered like old leather, his jaw covered in dark stubble, his hair black and long enough to touch his collar. He wore a clean shirt and vest, but his hands were scarred and rough, his boots still carrying mud from the mountain. She waited for disgust to flash across his features, for him to look at her the way the town did, like she was something unfortunate that had happened to him. Instead, his dark eyes met hers, and what she saw there made her breath catch. Sadness. Not pity, not contempt, just a deep, bone-tired sadness that seemed to recognize something in her she didn't even know she was showing. The Reverend cleared his throat. Dearly beloved. Clara barely heard the words. Her mind had gone somewhere else, somewhere far away from this freezing church and the whispers echoing off the stone walls. She thought about the ranch, the place her grandfather had built, the land her father had lost. She thought about the notice from the bank, the men who'd come to take inventory of everything the Whitmores owned. She thought about her mother, dead 6 years now, and how grateful Clara was that she hadn't lived to see this day. Do you, Clara Marie Whitmore, take this man? Her voice sounded strange in her own ears. I do. Boone's response came quieter, steadier. I do. The ring he slid onto her finger was plain silver, slightly too large. It spun loosely around her knuckle. Clara stared at it like it belonged to someone else. You may kiss the bride. Boone hesitated. Then, with a gentleness that seemed impossible from a man his size, he leaned down and pressed his lips briefly to her forehead, not her mouth. The gesture was so unexpected, so strangely kind, that Clara felt her throat tighten. Behind them, the congregation erupted in polite applause that couldn't quite mask the undercurrent of gossip. Well, that's done. She'll be halfway up the mountain by nightfall. Think she'll last the winter? Not a chance. Clara's father pulled her aside in the church vestibule while Boone spoke with the reverend. Samuel Whitmore looked like he'd aged a decade in the past month, his face gaunt, his hands shaking slightly as he gripped Clara's shoulders. I'm sorry, he whispered. Clara, I'm so sorry. She wanted to say it was all right, that she understood, that she forgave him, but the words wouldn't come. He seems decent, her father tried again. The lawyer said, he's fair, honest. He won't hurt you. You don't know that. I know he could have taken someone younger, prettier. He chose you. The words landed like a slap, even though Clara knew her father hadn't meant them that way. Chose you. Like she was the bottom of the barrel, the last pick, the option you took when nothing better was available. The debt's cleared, Samuel continued, his voice cracking. The ranch is safe. Your brothers can keep the land. You did that, Clara. You saved us. She nodded mechanically. Behind her father, through the doorway, she could see Boone Callahan standing alone by the church steps. His hat was in his hands, his broad back to the crowd, his shoulders set in a way that made him look carved from the mountain itself. Her husband. The word felt foreign, wrong. Clara, her father's voice dropped lower. If it's bad, if he's cruel, you send word. You understand? You send word, and I'll come get you. With what money? Clara wanted to ask. With what courage? But she didn't. Instead, she kissed her father's cheek, felt his rough beard against her skin one last time, and turned toward the door. Boone was waiting by a wagon hitched to 2 massive draft horses. He'd already loaded Clara's trunk, the single piece of luggage containing everything she owned in the world. When he saw her approaching, he moved to help her up, but Clara climbed onto the bench herself, her wedding dress tangling around her legs. They sat in silence. Around them, the people of Blackstone Valley watched from windows and doorways. Clara saw Mrs. Henderson clutching her shawl, whispering to her daughter. She saw Thomas Mercer, the banker's son, grinning like he'd just heard the best joke of his life. She saw her cousin Judith standing in the church doorway, tears streaming down her face. Boone picked up the reins. "You ready?" His voice was rough, like he didn't use it much. Clara nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The wagon lurched forward, and Blackstone Valley began to fall away behind them. They rode for 3 hours in near silence. The road, if you could call it that, wound up into the mountains through forests of pine and aspen that pressed in on both sides. The temperature dropped with every mile, and Clara pulled her thin coat tighter, wishing she'd thought to bring something heavier. The sky had finally made good on its promise, and snow began to fall in thick, lazy flakes that caught in her eyelashes and melted on her cheeks. Boone noticed her shivering. Without a word, he reached behind the bench and pulled out a heavy wool blanket, draping it over her shoulders. Clara stiffened at the gesture, but he'd already turned his attention back to the horses, his expression unreadable. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded once. The silence stretched on. Clara had never been this far from town. The Whitmore Ranch sat on the valley floor, close enough to Blackstone that you could walk there in an hour. She'd spent her entire life within a 5-mile radius, church on Sundays, the general store on Saturdays, the schoolhouse until she was 14 and her mother got sick and needed her at home. This felt like traveling to another country. "How much farther?" she finally asked. "Another hour? Maybe less?" Boone's eyes stayed on the road. "Snow's coming down harder, might slow us." Clara pulled the blanket tighter. "Do you make this trip often?" "Few times a year. When I need supplies the ranch can't provide." "That must be lonely." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Boone's jaw tightened, and Clara immediately regretted speaking. But when he answered, his voice held no anger. "It is," he said simply. They fell back into quiet, broken only by the creak of the wagon wheels and the soft whisper of snow through the trees. Clara studied Boone from the corner of her eye. The way he held the reins loose in his scarred hands, the way his shoulders stayed relaxed despite the cold, the way he seemed completely at ease in this wilderness that felt alien and hostile to her. "Why did you agree to this?" The question came out sharper than she'd intended. "The marriage? There must have been other ways to get what you wanted." Boone was quiet for so long, Clara thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I didn't want anything. Your father came to me." Clara's stomach dropped. "What?" "Samuel showed up at my ranch 6 weeks ago, said he was in trouble, said the bank was taking everything, asked if I'd consider..." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "An arrangement. And you just agreed? Just like that?" "Not just like that." Boone's knuckles tightened on the reins. "I thought about it. Asked questions, made sure you knew what you were agreeing to." I didn't agree to anything." Clara's voice rose, trembling with anger she'd been holding back for weeks. "My father told me 3 weeks ago that he'd sold me to clear his debts. I had no choice. I had no say. I stood in that church today because if I didn't, my entire family would lose everything." The wagon jerked to a stop. Boone turned to face her fully, for the first time since they'd left town, and the expression on his face made Clara's breath catch. He looked stricken, genuinely, deeply shocked. "He told me you'd agreed," Boone said slowly. "He said you knew about the arrangement, that you'd accepted it. He lied." The words hung in the frozen air between them. Boone's jaw worked silently. He looked away, staring into the dark trees, snow collected on his shoulders. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I wouldn't have done it if I'd known. I wouldn't have. Christ." He ran a hand over his face. "I'm sorry. Clara, I'm so damn sorry." The apology caught her completely off guard. In all her imaginings of this day, and there had been many, each worse than the last. She'd never once pictured her new husband apologizing. She'd expected cruelty, indifference, maybe violence, not this raw, honest regret. "It's done now," she heard herself say. "It doesn't have to be." Boone turned back to her, his dark eyes intense. "I can take you back. Right now. We can annul it. I'll tell the lawyer it was a mistake. I'll make sure your father's debt is still cleared. And you can... And go where?" Clara cut him off. "Back to town? Back to being the fat daughter nobody wanted? Back to listening to people whisper about how even a mountain hermit wouldn't keep me?" Boone flinched like she'd hit him. "They already think I'm pathetic," Clara continued, her voice breaking. "Going back would just prove them right. They're wrong. You don't know me. I know enough." Boone's voice was firm. "I know you're scared and angry, and you have every right to be both. I know your father put you in an impossible position, and I know you deserve better than being trapped in a marriage you never wanted." Clara stared at him, the strange, rough man who was being kinder to her in this frozen forest than anyone in Blackstone Valley had been in years. She didn't know what to do with it, didn't know how to respond to gentleness when she'd spent so long bracing for cruelty. "What happens now?" she finally whispered. Boone gathered the reins again. "Now I take you to the ranch, you get your own room, your own space, you decide what happens next. If you want to stay, we figure it out together. If you want to leave..." He paused. "I'll make sure you can." The wagon started moving again, slower this time, winding deeper into the mountains as daylight began to fade behind the heavy clouds. Clara hugged the blankets around herself and tried to imagine what she'd just agreed to. A room of her own space. The chance to decide. It was more than she'd had in months. The Callahan Ranch appeared through the trees just as true darkness fell. It wasn't what Clara had expected. She'd imagined something small and crude. A cabin, maybe, barely more than a shelter against the weather. Instead, she found a solid 2-story house built from dark timber and river stone, with a covered porch that's wrapped around the front and smoke rising from 2 chimneys. Behind it stood a large barn, several outbuildings and corrals that disappeared into the shadows. "You built all this?" Clara couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. "Most of it. Some was here when I bought the land." Boone brought the wagon to a stop near the front steps. "My father helped with the house before he passed." He climbed down and came around to Clara's side, offering his hand. This time she took it, letting him help her down onto the ground that felt strange and unstable after hours in the wagon. Her legs trembled, and Boone steadied her with a gentle grip on her elbow until she found her balance. "Careful, steps are icy." Clara followed him onto the porch and through a heavy front door that opened into darkness. Boone struck a match and lit a lantern, and warm light flooded a large main room that made Clara stop in her tracks. It was beautiful. Not fancy, there were no curtains on the windows, no rugs on the wooden floor, no decorations on the walls. But it was clean and well built, with a massive stone fireplace taking up most of one wall, sturdy furniture arranged around it, and a kitchen area visible through an open doorway. Everything looked handmade and solid, built to last generations. Everything also looked desperately lonely. There were no photographs, no personal touches, no signs that anyone actually lived here beyond the most basic necessities. It reminded Clara of the church, beautiful and cold and empty of life. "Your room's upstairs," Boone said, already heading for the staircase with her trunk balanced on one shoulder like it weighed nothing. "Second door on the left, there's a lock on the inside if you want it." Clara followed him up the stairs, her wedding dress catching on the steps. The hallway was dark except for the lantern lights, and Boone stopped at a closed door, setting her trunk down carefully. "There's a bed, a dresser, a washstand. I'll bring up water in the morning." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a key, pressing it into her palm. This locks from both sides. You decide who comes in. Clara stared at the key, then at him. Where's your room? Other end of the hall. He gestured vaguely behind him. You won't hear me. And you expect me to just... What? Stay here? I expect you to rest. You've had a long day? Boone's expression softened slightly. There's food downstairs when you're hungry. You don't have to eat with me if you don't want to. You don't have to do anything you don't want to. He turned to leave, then paused. Clara, I know I can't fix what your father did, can't undo the last few weeks, but I can promise you this, nobody's going to hurt you here. Not even me. Especially not me. Before she could respond, he disappeared down the hallway, his footsteps fading into silence. Clara stood alone in the doorway, the key heavy in her hand. Slowly she pushed the door open. The room was simple but clean, a large bed covered with a thick quilt, a wooden dresser with a cracked mirror, a washstand with a pitcher and basin. A single window looked out over the dark mountains, snow still falling steadily against the glass. Clara crossed to the bed and sat down heavily, her wedding dress bunching around her. The mattress was softer than her bed at home, the quilt warmer. Outside she could hear the wind picking up, whistling through the pines. She should feel afraid, she thought. Alone in a stranger's house in the middle of nowhere, married to a man she didn't know, with no way to get home even if she wanted to. But what she actually felt was exhausted, so desperately, bone-deep exhausted. Clara unlaced her boots with shaking fingers, pulled the too-tight dress over her head, and crawled under the quilt in her slip. The bed smelled like cedar and fresh air, nothing like the musty, familiar scent of her childhood room. Tomorrow she would figure out what came next. Tomorrow she would decide if she was staying or leaving. Tomorrow she would face whatever this new life was going to be. But tonight, for the first time in weeks, Clara Whitmore let herself stop thinking and simply sleep. She woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. For a confused moment, Clara thought she was home, that her mother was downstairs making breakfast, that the last few weeks had been some terrible dream. Then reality crashed back, the unfamiliar room, the mountain silence broken only by wind, the heavy ring on her finger that kept sliding around her knuckle. She was at the Callahan Ranch, she was married. The morning light, filtering through the window, was grey and weak, and when Clara looked outside, she saw that the snow had stopped but left everything covered in a thick white blanket. The world looked muffled and strange, like someone had draped cloth over all the familiar shapes. Clara dressed quickly in one of her old work dresses, brown wool, patched at the elbows, infinitely more comfortable than the wedding dress, now lying in a heap on the floor. She braided her hair with trembling fingers, splashed cold water from the basin on her face, and tried to prepare herself for facing Boone Callahan in daylight. When she finally worked up the courage to go downstairs, she found him sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a plate of untouched food. He looked up when she entered, and Clara saw that he hadn't slept. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. His jaw was tight with exhaustion. "Morning," he said quietly. "There's breakfast. Help yourself." Clara moved to the stove where a pan of bacon sat next to a pot of coffee. Her stomach growled despite her nerves. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, and even then, only a few bites. She fixed herself a plate and sat down across from Boone, leaving the length of the table between them. They ate in silence for several minutes before he spoke. "I've been thinking," Boone set down his coffee cup, "about what you said yesterday, about not having a choice." Clara's stomach tightened. And you were right. Your father lied to me, but that doesn't change what happened to you. You got forced into this marriage, same as if I dragged you to that church myself. He met her eyes directly. "So here's what I'm proposing. You stay here through the winter. It's too dangerous to travel back now anyway, with the snow. That gives us both time to figure out what we want. Come spring, if you want to leave, I'll take you back to town. Myself, I'll tell everyone it was my fault, that I couldn't be the husband you deserved. Your reputation stays intact. And if I stay? Boone's expression flickered with something Clara couldn't quite read. Then we figure out what this marriage actually is, on terms we both agree to. Clara pushed her bacon around her plate, her mind racing. It was a generous offer, more than generous, but it also meant spending months isolated on this mountain with a man she barely knew, trusting that he'd keep his word, trusting that he wouldn't turn cruel the moment she let her guard down. "What do you get out of this?" she asked suspiciously. "Why make this offer at all?" "Because it's the right thing to do." "Nobody does the right thing just because it's right." Boone's jaw tightened. "I do." They stared at each other across the table, and Clara saw something hard and unbending in his eyes. Not anger, but a kind of stubborn integrity that seemed carved into his bones. He meant it, she realized. He actually meant it. "Fine," she heard herself say. "I'll stay through winter, but I want my own space, my own time, and if I decide to leave come spring, you don't try to stop me." "Agreed." "And you don't," Clara's voice faltered, "you don't expect me to be a wife. Not in that way." Understanding crossed Boone's face, followed quickly by something that looked like shame. "Never, I swear it." Clara nodded slowly, her heart pounding. This was insane. This whole situation was insane. But what choice did she actually have? Go back to Blackstone Valley and admit defeat? Prove everyone right about her being unwanted and unmarriageable? At least here she had time, space, a room with a lock. At least here Boone Callahan looked at her like she was a person instead of a burden. "Okay," she said quietly. "We have a deal." Boone's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Okay." They finished breakfast in silence, and afterwards, Boone showed Clara around the ranch, the barn where he kept 6 horses and 4 milk cows, the chicken coop with 24 hens, the smokehouse and root cellar stocked with enough supplies to last until spring. He explained the daily rhythms of the ranch, which chores needed doing, where everything was kept. "You don't have to help," he said as they stood in the barn watching the horses eat. "But if you want something to do, the work's there." Clara thought about her mother, who'd always said, "Idle hands made for troubled minds." Thought about the long winter ahead, the endless hours she'd spend alone in that house if she had nothing to occupy herself with. "I'll help," she decided, "but I choose which chores." Fair enough. Over the next few days, they fell into a careful routine. Boone woke before dawn to tend the animals and check the fences. Clara slept later, then spent her mornings in the kitchen, baking bread and cooking meals that Boone ate without comment but always finished completely. Afternoons she spent reading books from Boone's surprisingly large collection or watching the snow fall outside her window. Evenings they ate dinner together in careful silence, then retreated to opposite ends of the house. They were like 2 strangers sharing a hotel, polite and distant and determinedly separate. But slowly, so slowly, Clara almost didn't notice things began to shift. It started small, Boone asking her opinion on which horse to ride out to the north pasture, Clara mentioning that they were low on flour, and Boone making a note to get more on his next trip to town, him showing her how to milk the cows when her hands got too cold to feel her fingers, her leaving coffee on the stove for him in the mornings the way he liked it, black and strong enough to strip paint. They started talking not about anything important at first, just small observations about the weather, the animals, the way the mountains looked different every day depending on the light, but talking nonetheless, 2 weeks after the wedding, Boone came in from feeding the horses to find Clara kneading bread at the kitchen counter, flour dusting her arms up to the elbows. "Smells good," he said, hanging his coat by the door. "It's the same recipe I've made every day this week. Still smells good." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks and focused harder on the dough. "There's coffee. Thanks." She heard him pour a cup, heard his boots on the floor as he crossed to the window. Outside, the afternoon sun was trying to break through the clouds, sending weak shafts of light across the snow. "Clara," Boone's voice was quiet. "Can I ask you something?" Her hands stilled in the dough. "I suppose." "Why didn't you fight it? The marriage? You could have run, could have refused." Clara's throat tightened. It was the question she'd been asking herself for weeks, the one she'd never found a good answer to. "Where would I have gone?" she finally said. "I have no money, no prospects, no skills beyond cooking and cleaning, and my father..." She swallowed hard. "He made mistakes, bad ones, but he's still my father, still my family. They needed me to fix this." "That wasn't your responsibility." "Maybe not, but it was my choice." Clara looked up at him. "That's the difference. You gave me a choice yesterday. My father never did." Boone's expression darkened. "Your father's a coward. He's a desperate man who made desperate decisions. That's no excuse for what he did to you." Clara turned back to her bread, punching down the dough harder than necessary. "Maybe not, but it's done now, and standing here being angry about it won't change anything." She expected Boone to argue. Instead, he just nodded slowly and took another sip of his coffee. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I'm glad you're here." Clara's hands froze. She looked up, searching his face for mockery or pity, but found only simple honesty. "Why?" she whispered. Boone was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes distant. When he spoke, his voice was rough with something that sounded like loneliness. "Because this house has been too quiet for too long." 3 weeks into their strange arrangement, Boone announced they needed to go to town for supplies. Clara's stomach dropped. I'd rather stay here. We're low on flour, sugar, coffee, some other things we can't make ourselves." Boone was loading the wagon as he spoke, his breath coming out in clouds. "I'd go alone, but the list is long and I'll need help carrying everything back. Can't it wait?" "Not really." He paused, seeing the fear on her face. "They're just people, Clara. They can't hurt you." "You don't know that." "I do." Boone's voice was firm. "Because I won't let them." Clara wanted to argue, but she knew he was right about the supplies. And part of her, a small, stubborn part, was tired of hiding. Tired of being afraid of the same people who'd made her life miserable for years. They left early the next morning, the wagon loaded with beef to sell. The ride down the mountain felt different this time. Clara had grown used to the isolation, and returning to civilization felt like stepping backwards into a life she'd already left behind. Blackstone Valley looked exactly the same. The same brown buildings lining the main street, the same people hurrying through the cold, the same church steeple pointing at the gray sky. It had only been 3 weeks, but it felt like years. The whispers started the moment they arrived. Clara saw Mrs. Henderson grab her daughter's arm and lean in close, talking behind her hand. Saw Thomas Mercer stop in the middle of the street to stare, a slow smile spreading across his face. Saw her cousin Judith peek out from the general store and then duck quickly back inside. Boone's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He helped Clara down from the wagon with exaggerated care, his hand firm on her elbow, and together they walked toward the general store. The room fell silent when they entered. Mr. Peterson, the shop owner, looked up from his ledger with poorly concealed surprise. "Callahan. Mrs. Callahan. Wasn't expecting to see you folks so soon. We need supplies." Boone pulled out the list, his voice flat. Everything on here, plus 50 pounds of feed grain. Peterson took the paper, scanning it quickly. Well, that's quite a bit. Gonna take some time to pull together. We'll wait. As Peterson disappeared into the back room, Clara became painfully aware of the other customers in the store. 3 women clustered near the fabric, pretending to examine calico while their eyes stayed fixed on Clara. A man by the tool section, making no effort to hide his staring. Everyone waiting to see what would happen. Well, well, the voice came from behind them, thick with amusement. If it isn't the happy couple. Clara turned to find Thomas Mercer leaning against the doorway, his arms crossed, that same ugly smile on his face. He was 26, handsome in a bland sort of way, and had spent the last 3 years making comments about Clara's weight every time he saw her in town. Mercer? Boone's voice dropped to a warning. Just wanted to congratulate you, Callahan. Heard you paid top dollar for your bride. Thomas's eyes slid over Clara with deliberate slowness. Though between you and me, I think you overpaid. Could have gotten 2 skinny ones for that price. The women near the fabric gasped. Clara felt her face burn, felt the old shame rushing back like a flood. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor, to be anywhere but here. Boone moved faster than she'd ever seen him move. One moment he was standing beside her. The next he had Thomas Mercer by the throat, slammed against the wall, hard enough to rattle the shelves. The smile vanished from Thomas's face, replaced by wide-eyed fear. You speak about my wife again, Boone said, his voice deadly quiet. And you answer to me. Understand? Thomas tried to nod, couldn't quite manage it with Boone's hands around his windpipe. I didn't hear you. Yes, sir. Boone held him there a moment longer, then released him so suddenly Thomas stumbled and nearly fell. The younger man scrambled for the door, not looking back. The store was absolutely silent. Boone turned back to Clara, his expression softening immediately. You all right? Clara couldn't speak, couldn't process what had just happened. In 24 years, no one had ever defended her like that. No one had ever stood up for her. No one had ever made someone else pay for hurting her. Clara, I'm fine, she managed. Thank you. Boone nodded once, then turned to face the rest of the store. His voice rang out clear and hard. Anyone else have something they want to say about my wife? No one moved. No one spoke. Good. Mr. Peterson emerged from the back room with the first load of supplies, his face pale, his hands shaking slightly. I'll get this loaded for you. They finished the shopping in silence. As Boone loaded the wagon, Clara stood on the boardwalk watching the people of Blackstone Valley watch her. Their expressions had changed. No more open mockery, no more cruel smiles, just uncertainty, wariness, fear. For the first time in her life, Clara Whitmore wasn't the one afraid. The ride back to the ranch felt different. Clara kept stealing glances at Boone, trying to reconcile the quiet, gentle man she'd been living with and the violence she'd just witnessed in the general store. You didn't have to do that, she finally said. Yes, I did. Thomas Mercer has been saying worse about me for years. Not anymore, he won't. Boone's hands were steady on the reins. Not as long as I'm around. Clara pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. People are going to talk. They're going to say you're too rough, too violent. Let them talk. It'll make things harder for you. Clara. Boone glanced at her. I don't care what those people think of me. Haven't cared in years. But I'll be damned if I let them keep tearing you down. Something warm and unfamiliar bloomed in Clara's chest. She looked away, afraid of what her face might show. Why do you care? She whispered. Boone was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, because someone should have been doing it all along. They rode the rest of the way in silence, but it was different now. Warmer. Less like two strangers sharing space and more like something else. Something Clara didn't have a name for yet. That night, after dinner, Boone built up the fire in the main room and settled into his chair with a book. Clara sat nearby, with her mending, stealing glances at him over her needle. The house felt smaller somehow, closer. Boone? He looked up. Yeah? What you said before, about this house being too quiet. Clara set down her mending. What did you mean? His expression shuttered immediately. Nothing. Forget I said it. I can't. Clara. Please. She didn't know why it mattered so much, only that it did. Please just tell me. Boone closed his book slowly. For a long moment he stared into the fire, the flames casting shadows across his face. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I was married before. 7 years ago. Her name was Sarah. Clara's breath caught. She'd heard rumors in town, vague whispers about Boone Callahan's dead wife, but no one ever seemed to know the details. We had a daughter, Boone continued. Emma. She wasn't even a year old when the fever came through. Took them both within a week. I'm so sorry. I built this house for them. Sarah picked out where every window should go, where the kitchen should be. Emma never got to sleep in the room I built for her. His voice cracked slightly. After they died, I couldn't bring myself to leave. Couldn't bring myself to fill the silence, so I just stayed alone. Clara felt tears pricking her eyes. That's why you're up here. Why you don't come to town. Couldn't stand the pity. Couldn't stand people telling me it was God's plan or that time would heal everything. Boone looked at her then, his eyes raw. Time doesn't heal anything. It just makes you better at carrying the hurt. She understood suddenly why he'd agreed to the marriage. Not for a wife, not for companionship, for sound, for movement, for proof that life could exist in these rooms again. I'm sorry, Clara said again, inadequately. Don't be! Boone's expression softened. You being here, it's helped, more than you know. Clara didn't know what to say to that, so instead she just nodded and picked up her mending again, and they sat together in comfortable silence while the fire burned low and the wind howled outside. For the first time since the wedding, Clara thought maybe, just maybe, she could stay here. Not because she had to, because she wanted to. The days began to blur together in a way that wasn't unpleasant. Clara woke each morning to the sound of Boone moving around downstairs, the quiet clatter of the stove being lit, the soft thud of boots on wooden floors. She'd dress in the cold room, her breath fogging the air, then descend to find coffee already made and Boone halfway through his first cup, staring out the kitchen window at the snow-covered mountains. They'd eat breakfast together now, not in silence. That had ended the night Boone told her about Sarah and Emma. Now they talked about small things, whether the old mare was favoring her left hoof, if the chickens were laying enough eggs, how much firewood they'd need to get through February, ordinary things that somehow felt important. Storm's coming, Boone said one morning in early December, nodding toward the darkening sky. Big one, by the look of it. We should bring in extra wood today. Clara followed his gaze. The clouds hung low and heavy, the kind that promised feet of snow rather than inches. How can you tell? The way the wind's shifting, the animals too. They get restless before bad weather. He drained his coffee. You ever chop wood before? Once or twice. My father showed me when I was younger. Good, we'll need to split what's left in the pile behind the barn. They worked side by side in the cold morning air, Boone handling the larger logs while Clara tackled the smaller ones. The physical labor felt good after weeks of staying mostly indoors. Clara's muscles burned, her hands blistered inside her gloves, but she kept going, matching Boone's steady rhythm. He was right about the storm. By noon, the first flakes were falling. By evening, the world had disappeared behind a wall of white. They ate dinner while the wind howled outside, shaking the windows in their frames. Clara had made stew from the last of the beef and vegetables from the root cellar, and Boone ate 3 bowls without comment, which she'd learned meant he liked it. "This'll last a few days at least," he said, gesturing toward the storm. "Maybe a week. We're stocked up, but if there's anything you need from the barn, best get it tonight before it gets worse." "I'm fine." "You sure? Books? Anything to keep occupied?" Clara realized he was worried she'd be bored, trapped inside with nothing to do but stare at 4 walls. The thought was oddly touching. "I'll manage," she said. "I've got mending to do, and I've been meaning to reorganize the pantry." Boone's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. "That's exciting." "Oh, absolutely thrilling." They looked at each other across the table, and Clara felt something shift in her chest. Something warm and unexpected and slightly terrifying. She looked away quickly, standing to clear the dishes. "I'll wash up. I'll dry." It had become their routine, Clara washing, Boone drying, the two of them working in companionable silence. But tonight felt different. The storm made the house feel smaller, more intimate. Clara was acutely aware of Boone standing beside her, his shoulder occasionally brushing hers as he reached for another plate. "Clara." His voice was quiet. "Can I ask you something?" She kept her hands in the dishwater, not looking at him. "That depends on the question. Do you regret it? Staying here instead of going back in November when the weather was still clear?" Clara's hands stilled. It was a question she'd been avoiding asking herself because she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Some days I think I should have left when I had the chance. Other days..." She trailed off. "Other days? Other days I'm glad I'm here." She felt, rather than saw, Boone relax slightly beside her. They finished the dishes in silence, and afterwards Clara retreated to the main room with her mending, while Boone added more wood to the fire. The storm raged outside, but inside it was warm and almost peaceful. Clara was repairing a torn shirt when she noticed Boone watching her from his chair, his book forgotten in his lap. "What?" she asked. "Nothing, just..." He shook his head. "This is nice, that's all." "Mending is nice?" "No, this, you being here, the house feeling lived in." He paused. "I know that's probably a strange thing to say." "It's not strange." Clara set down her needle. "I understand what you mean." The wind rattled the windows hard enough to make them both glance over. Snow was piling up on the sills, blocking out what little light remained from the early winter evening. "Tell me about Sarah," Clara heard herself say. "If you want to, you don't have to." Boone was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he set his book aside and leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant. She was small, laughed loud, had opinions about everything. A faint smile crossed his face. Used to drive me crazy, the way she'd rearrange my tools in the barn. Said my system made no sense. She was probably right. "How did you meet?" "Her father sold me 2 horses when I first bought this land. She came along to help deliver them and..." He shrugged. "She stayed. We were married 6 months later." "That fast?" "When you know, you know." Boone's expression darkened. "Or I thought I did. Turns out knowing someone and keeping them safe are 2 different things." "The fever wasn't your fault?" "Doesn't matter. I was her husband. Emma's father. I was supposed to protect them." Clara understood that kind of guilt. The irrational but unshakable belief that you should have been able to prevent something completely beyond your control. "My mother died when I was 18, she said quietly. "Consumption. It took 6 months. By the end, she couldn't even recognize me. Clara stared at the fire. I was with her every day, and it wasn't enough. Nothing I did was enough. That's not the same as, isn't it? Clara looked at him. You think you should have saved them. I think I should have saved her. We're both carrying guilt for things we couldn't control. Boone's jaw worked silently. Outside, the storm howled louder, and somewhere in the barn, a horse whinnied nervously. I should check the animals, Boone said, standing abruptly. Make sure they're secure. In this weather? Won't take long. He was out the door before Clara could argue, pulling on his heavy coat and disappearing into the white chaos outside. Clara watched from the window, seeing nothing but snow and darkness, her heart beating faster than it should. He came back 15 minutes later covered in snow, his beard frozen, his hands red with cold. Clara had coffee waiting and a blanket which she draped over his shoulders without thinking. Everything all right? She asked. Fine, just needed air. His eyes met hers. Thank you. For what? For understanding, for not pushing. He wrapped his cold hands around the coffee cup. For being here. Clara didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded and went back to her mending. But something had changed between them in the space of that conversation. Some wall had come down, some distance had closed. The storm lasted 5 days. 5 days of being trapped inside with nothing but each other for company. Clara had worried it would be unbearable, but instead, she found herself looking forward to the long evenings by the fire, the quiet conversations that stretched into the night, the way Boone would read passages from his books out loud when he found something interesting. On the third day, she taught him how to make proper biscuits. You're doing it wrong, she said, watching him knead the dough with hands better suited to chopping wood than baking. You're working it too much, it needs to stay light. It's just flour and water. It's an art form. Clara nudged him aside and demonstrated, her hands working the dough with practiced efficiency. See? Gentle. You're not trying to kill it. Boone watched with an expression somewhere between amusement and concentration. My mother tried to teach me this 20 years ago. I was hopeless then too. You're not hopeless, just enthusiastic. He laughed, actually laughed. And the sound was so unexpected that Clara stopped what she was doing to stare at him. She'd never heard him laugh before. It transformed his face, made him look years younger, less burdened. What? He asked, still smiling. Nothing, You should do that more often. Do what? Laugh. The smile faded slightly but didn't disappear entirely. Haven't had much reason to lately. Clara held his gaze. Maybe you do now? The biscuits came out perfect, golden and flaky and better than anything Boone had ever made. They ate them hot with butter and honey, and Clara felt ridiculously proud of herself for such a small accomplishment. That night, after dinner, Boone brought out a deck of cards. You play rummy? He asked. My brothers taught me. I'm terrible at it. Good. So am I. They played for hours, keeping score on a piece of paper, arguing good-naturedly about the rules, laughing when one of them made a particularly bad play. The storm continued outside, but inside the house felt warm and bright and almost happy. Clara won the first 3 games, Boone won the next 4. You said you were terrible at this, Clara accused, dealing for the 9th round. I said I was terrible. I never said I lost. That's cheating. That's strategy. Clara threw a card at him, which he caught easily, grinning. The expression made her stomach flip in a way she absolutely was not going to think about. By the time they finally called it quits, it was well past midnight. Clara's eyes were heavy, her body warm from the fire and the whiskey Boone had poured them both an hour ago. I should sleep, she said, standing slowly. Thank you for this. I haven't had this much fun in... I can't remember how long. Boone stood too. Me neither. They looked at each other across the small table, and Clara became aware of how close they were standing. Close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could smell the wood smoke and leather that clung to his skin. "Good night, Boone," she whispered. "Good night, Clara." She made herself turn and walk toward the stairs, feeling his eyes on her back the whole way. When the storm finally broke on the 6th day, the world outside was transformed. Snow lay 3 feet deep in places, sculpted by the wind into strange shapes that glittered in the weak winter sunlight. The mountains looked closer, somehow, sharper against the bright blue sky. Boone spent the morning digging out paths to the barn and outbuildings while Clara baked bread and tried not to think about how empty the house felt with him outside. She'd gotten used to his presence, she realized, used to the sound of his voice, the weight of his footsteps, the way he took up space without being intrusive. She was setting the bread out to cool when she heard a crash from outside, followed by cursing. Clara ran to the window and saw Boone lying in the snow near the barn, holding his leg, his face twisted in pain. She didn't think, just grabbed her coat and ran outside, her skirts tangling around her legs as she plowed through the deep snow. What happened? She dropped to her knees beside him, stepped wrong, went through the ice, under the snow. Boone's voice was tight, ankles twisted, maybe worse. "Can you stand?" "Don't know yet." Clara got her shoulder under his arm and helped him up, feeling the solid weight of him leaning against her. He tried to put weight on the injured leg and immediately hissed in pain. "Barn's closer," Clara said, already moving. "Come on." They made it to the barn in slow, painful steps. Clara helped Boone sit on a hay bale and knelt to examine his ankle, which was already starting to swell inside his boot. "I need to get this off," she said. "It's going to hurt. Everything already hurts." Clara worked as gently as she could, unlacing the boot and easing it off while Boone gritted his teeth and didn't make a sound. The ankle underneath was angry and swollen, already darkening with bruising. "I don't think it's broken," she said, testing it carefully, "but it's bad. You need to stay off it." "I have chores?" "I'll do the chores." "Clara, you can't." "Watch me." She stood, hands on her hips. "Where's the medical supplies?" "House, upstairs closet." "Stay here, don't move." She ran back to the house, found the supplies, and returned with bandages and a bottle of whiskey. Boone had managed to get his sock off and was poking at his ankle with a grimace. "Stop that," Clara ordered, kneeling beside him again. "Let me." She wrapped the ankle as tightly as she dared, the way her mother had taught her years ago when one of her brothers broke his wrist. Boone watched her work, his expression unreadable. "Where'd you learn this?" he asked. "My mother. She was good at fixing things." Clara tied off the bandage. "There. That should help with the swelling." "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. You still have to get back to the house." It took 20 minutes to cover the 50 yards between the barn and the front door. By the time Clara got Boone settled on the couch with his leg elevated and a cold compress on his ankle, she was sweating despite the cold. "I'll handle the evening chores," she said, pulling on her coat again. "Clara, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. Unless you want those cows standing there with full udders all night." Boone's mouth quirked. "You know how to milk a cow? You showed me last month, remember? How hard can it be?" Famous last words. Clara made a face at him and headed back outside. The truth was, she was terrified. She'd watched Boone handle the animals dozens of times, but watching and doing were very different things. Still, she'd meant what she said. The work had to get done, and Boone couldn't do it. So she would. The first cow kicked over the bucket twice before Clara got the hang of it. The second one was more cooperative. The third seemed to sense Clara's inexperience and made her work for every drop. By the time she finished, her hands were cramping and her back ached, but she'd done it. She fed the horses, collected eggs from the chickens, made sure all the animals had water. The work took twice as long as it did when Boone handled it, and she made mistakes, gave one horse too much grain, forgot to latch the chicken coop door properly and had to go back, but she got through it. When she finally stumbled back into the house, exhausted and covered in straw, she found Boone exactly where she'd left him on the couch. "How bad was it?" he asked. "Terrible. Your cows hate me." "They hate everyone. Don't take it personally." Clara sank into a chair, pulling off her boots. "How's your ankle?" "Hurts like hell, but the swelling's going down." He studied her. "You did good out there." "I did terrible out there, but everything's fed and watered, so I suppose that counts for something." She made them dinner, soup and bread, simple but hot, and they ate in the main room with Boone still on the couch. Afterwards, Clara brought him fresh bandages and rewrapped his ankle, her hands steadier this time. "You're good at this," Boone said quietly. "At what? Wrapping injuries?" "At taking care of things. People." He met her eyes. "Me?" Clara's hands stilled on the bandage. "Someone has to. It's more than that." His voice was rough. "You didn't have to run out there when I fell. Didn't have to help me inside, handle all the chores, make sure I was settled. You could have left me to figure it out myself." "That's not who I am." "I know." Boone caught her hand, his rough fingers warm against hers. "That's why I'm grateful." Clara's heart was hammering so hard, she was sure he could hear it. She should pull away, should make some excuse and retreat to her room, should maintain the careful distance they'd been keeping. Instead, she stayed exactly where she was, her hand in his, looking into eyes that had stopped being a stranger's weeks ago. "Boone, I know we had an agreement," he said quickly. "I know you're supposed to decide in the spring, but Clara, I need you to know something." He took a breath. "I don't want you to leave." The words hung in the air between them. "You don't mean that," Clara whispered. "I do. I know it's not fair to say it now. I know it puts pressure on you, but I can't." He broke off, frustrated. "These past few weeks, having you here, it's been... I can't remember the last time I wanted to get up in the morning. Can't remember the last time this house felt like home instead of a tomb." Clara pulled her hand back, her chest tight. "You're just lonely. You said so yourself." "It's more than that. How can you know? You barely know me. I know you're kind even when you have no reason to be. I know you're stronger than you think you are. I know you make terrible coffee, but excellent biscuits, and you hum when you're concentrating, and you're afraid of the dark but too proud to say so." Boone's expression was raw, open in a way she'd never seen. "I know that every day I spend with you makes me want another one." Clara stood abruptly, her mind spinning. This was too much, too fast. She wasn't ready for this, wasn't ready to feel what she was feeling, wasn't ready to admit that somewhere along the way she'd stopped being afraid of Boone Callahan and started being afraid of losing him. "I need to think," she managed. "Clara, please just give me time." She fled upstairs before he could respond, closing her bedroom door and leaning against it, her heart racing. What was she doing? What was she feeling? This was supposed to be temporary, a winter arrangement, a way to survive until spring when she could make a real decision about her life. Except somewhere in the quiet mornings and the long evenings, somewhere in the card games and the bread making and the comfortable silences, it had stopped being temporary. It had started being real. Clara undressed slowly, her hands shaking. She climbed into bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of Boone moving around downstairs. After a while, she heard his uneven footsteps on the stairs, slower than usual because of his ankle, heard his bedroom door close. The house fell silent. Clara lay awake for hours, turning Boone's words over in her mind. "Every day I spend with you makes me want another one." When had anyone ever said something like that to her? When had anyone ever looked at her the way Boone did? Not with pity or disgust, but with something that looked dangerously close to affection. She thought about going back to Blackstone Valley in the spring, thought about facing the same people who'd mocked her, returning to a life that had never fit right, trying to find her place in a world that had made it clear she didn't have one. Then she thought about staying here, about mornings with coffee and evenings by the fire, about Boone's rare smiles and his careful kindness, about building something new instead of returning to something broken. Somewhere around midnight, Clara made her decision. She got out of bed, pulled on her robe, and walked down the hallway to Boone's room. Her hand hesitated on the door, then knocked softly. "Come in?" She pushed the door open. Boone was sitting on the edge of his bed, his injured ankle propped on a pillow, still fully dressed, except for his boots. He looked up when she entered, surprise crossing his face. "Clara, are you?" "I'm scared," she interrupted. "I'm scared of staying, and I'm scared of leaving. I'm scared of what people will say and what they'll think. I'm scared that you'll realize I'm not what you want. I'm scared that I'll wake up one day and regret every choice I've made." She took a breath. "But I'm more scared of going back to the person I was before I came here, before you." Boone stood slowly, favoring his good leg. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I don't want to wait until spring." Clara's voice shook. "I'm saying I want to stay, not because I have to, not because I'm trapped, because this place, this life, you..." She broke off. "Because I'm happier here than I've been anywhere else." The distance between them disappeared in 3 steps. Boone's hands came up to frame her face, gentle despite their roughness, and Clara realized she was crying. "You're sure?" he whispered. "No, but I want to try anyway." "That's all I'm asking?" He kissed her then, soft and careful and achingly sweet. Clara's hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, and Boone made a low sound in his throat that sent heat rushing through her entire body. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Boone rested his forehead against hers. "I'll make you happy," he promised. "I swear it. You already do. You." They stayed like that for a long moment, holding each other in the quiet darkness. Then Clara stepped back, suddenly shy. "I should go. You need rest. Stay." Boone caught her hand. "Just stay. We don't have to do anything. I just want you close." Clara hesitated, then nodded. They lay down together on top of the blankets, fully clothed, Clara tucked against Boone's side with her head on his chest. She could hear his heartbeat strong and steady, could feel the rise and fall of his breathing. "This is enough," she whispered. "More than enough." Clara closed her eyes and let herself relax for the first time in months, maybe years. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the windows, but she barely noticed. She was exactly where she wanted to be. Clara woke to pale winter light filtering through unfamiliar windows and the warmth of Boone's body beside her. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was or why her cheek was pressed against a man's chest. Then the previous night came rushing back. The conversation, the kiss, the decision to stay, her decision to stay. Boone was already awake, she realized. His fingers were tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder through the fabric of her robe, his breathing steady and calm. "Morning," he said quietly. Clara lifted her head to look at him. His hair was mussed, his jaw dark with stubble, his eyes soft in the early light. He looked younger like this, less haunted. "Morning," her voice came out rough. "How's your ankle?" "Stiff, but better than yesterday." His hand moved to her face, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "How are you?" Clara considered the question. How was she? terrified, exhilarated, still not entirely sure she hadn't dreamed the whole thing. "I'm okay," she said finally. "Just okay? I'm still figuring it out." Boone nodded, slowly accepting this. "Take your time, I'm not going anywhere." They lay there a while longer, neither quite ready to face the day, but eventually Clara's practical nature won out, and she sat up, smoothing her tangled hair. "I should start breakfast and check on the animals. I can help. You can stay off that ankle for at least another day." Clara stood, tightening her robe. "Doctor's orders." "You're not a doctor." "I wrapped your ankle. That makes me close enough." She left before he could argue, padding back to her own room to dress properly. Her hands shook as she buttoned her dress, and she had to stop twice to catch her breath. What had she done? What was she doing? Last night in the darkness, it had all seemed so clear, so right. Now in the cold light of morning, doubt crept in like frost. But when she went downstairs and found Boone already in the kitchen despite his injury, making coffee with careful movements, the doubt faded slightly. He looked up when she entered and smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "Thought you'd sleep longer," he said. "Couldn't. Too much to do." Clara moved to the stove. "Sit down. I'll handle breakfast." "Yes, ma'am." They fell into an easy rhythm, Clara cooking, while Boone sat at the table and told her which horses needed extra grain, which fence posts had come loose in the storm, which tasks could wait and which couldn't. It felt domestic in a way that should have been strange but wasn't. After breakfast, Clara bundled up and headed out to handle the chores. The work was still hard, still unfamiliar, but easier than the day before. The animals were starting to recognize her, to accept her presence. Even the cantankerous old cow that had given her the most trouble seemed slightly less hostile. She was hauling water to the horse trough when she saw the rider coming up the mountain path. Clara's stomach dropped. Visitors meant questions, meant explanations she wasn't ready to give. She set down the buckets and waited, squinting against the bright snow. The rider resolved into her cousin Judith, bundled in a heavy coat and looking half frozen. She pulled her horse to a stop near the barn, her face pale and worried. "Clara, thank heavens you're all right." "Why wouldn't I be?" Clara moved closer, confused. "Judith, what are you doing here?" "What am I?" "Clara, there was a massive storm. No one's heard from you in over a week. Your father was beside himself. He sent me up here to check." Judith broke off, really looking at Clara for the first time. "Are you all right? Has he hurt you?" "What? No. Boone would never. Then why do you look—" Judith gestured vaguely at Clara's appearance. "Different." Clara glanced down at herself. Her dress was old and patched, her coat worn, her hands chapped and rough from work. She probably looked like exactly what she was, a woman who'd been hauling water and mucking stalls, and living a life nothing like the one she'd left behind. "I'm fine," Clara said firmly. "Better than fine. We got through the storm without any problems." "We?" The question hung in the cold air. Clara met her cousin's eyes and saw the worry there, the genuine concern. Judith had been the only person in Blackstone Valley who'd cried at Clara's wedding, who'd tried to make the dress fit, who'd written her a letter the week after she left that simply said, "I hope you're safe." "Come inside," Clara decided. "It's too cold to talk out here." She helped Judith stable her horse, then led her into the house where Boone was attempting to stand, despite his injured ankle. He froze when he saw Judith, clearly not expecting company. "This is my cousin Judith," Clara said quickly. "She came to check on us after the storm. Judith, this is Boone, my husband." The words felt strange in her mouth, but not wrong. Judith's eyes went wide, darting between them, clearly trying to assess the situation. "I'll make tea," Clara said. "Sit, both of you." She busied herself with the kettle while Judith and Boone sat in awkward silence at opposite ends of the table. When Clara finally joined them with 3 cups of tea, Judith leaned forward intently. "Tell me the truth. Are you safe here?" "Yes." "Are you happy?" Clara hesitated, then nodded. "I am. I know that's hard to believe, but it's not hard to believe, I can see it." Judith's expression softened. "You look different, Clara. Stronger, more yourself. I feel different. Your father's been worried sick. He thinks Callahan dragged you up here to..." She trailed off delicately. "To what?" Boone's voice was rough. "Force her into something she didn't want? Keep her prisoner? I gave Clara her own room, her own choice about everything. She stayed because she wanted to." Judith studied him carefully. "I believe you, but you understand why we were concerned. The arrangement was unusual." "The arrangement was wrong," Boone said bluntly. "I was told Clara agreed. She didn't. When I found out, I offered to take her back immediately." "But you stayed," Judith said to Clara. "I stayed." They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the crackling of the fire. Judith sipped her tea, her eyes moving around the kitchen, taking in the fresh bread on the counter, the clean dishes, the comfortable way Clara and Boone sat together despite the visible tension. "All right," Judith said finally. "I'll tell your father you're well. But Clara, if you ever need anything, if anything changes, you send word. Promise me." "I promise." Judith left an hour later after warming up and accepting a package of bread and dried meat for the ride back. Clara watched her disappear down the mountain path, feeling a strange mixture of relief and sadness. "You could have gone with her," Boone said quietly from the doorway. "If you wanted." Clara turned to face him. "I know, but you didn't." "No, I didn't." Something in his expression shifted, relaxed. He reached for her hand and she let him take it, their fingers intertwining naturally. "And come on," Clara said. "Your ankle's not going to heal if you keep standing on it." Over the next few weeks, as Boone's ankle slowly mended, they found a new rhythm. Clara took over more of the daily chores while Boone handled the tasks that required less walking. They cooked together, ate together, spent their evenings playing cards or reading by the fire. And slowly, carefully, they began to learn each other. Clara discovered that Boone couldn't carry a tune to save his life but hummed anyway while he worked, that he had an irrational dislike of turnips, that he taught himself to read at 14 using his mother's Bible and a dictionary, that he slept on his left side and woke instantly at any unusual sound. Boone learned that Clara bit her lip when she was concentrating, that she'd wanted to be a teacher before her mother got sick, that she could recite entire passages of poetry from memory, that she had nightmares sometimes about the bank taking her family's land and woke up crying. They were still careful with each other physically. Boone never pushed, never assumed, always asked before touching her. But the space between them grew smaller each day. A hand on her back as he passed, her fingers brushing his as she handed him coffee. The way they sat closer together on the couch now, their shoulders touching. It was late January when Boone announced they needed to go back to town. Clara's stomach immediately knotted. "Why?" "Supplies, salt and sugar, mostly. Some other things we're running low on." He saw her expression. "I know you don't want to, but we can't avoid town forever." "I can try." "Clara." Boone caught her hand. "They're going to talk no matter what we do. Might as well give them something real to talk about instead of letting them make things up." He had a point, Clara knew. The gossip mill in Blackstone Valley ran on speculation and rumor. Their absence would only fuel it. "Fine," she said, reluctantly. "But we go, we get supplies, we leave. No lingering." "Deal." They set out 3 days later under clear skies, the wagon loaded with beef to sell. Clara's nerves increased with every mile down the mountain. She kept remembering the last trip to town, the whispers, the cruel jokes, the way Boone had slammed Thomas Mercer against the wall. What would they say this time? Blackstone Valley looked exactly the same as always. Same brown buildings, same people hurrying through the cold, same church steeple pointing at the sky. But when Clara and Boone rode down the main street, something was different. People stared, yes, but there was less open mockery, more caution. Several men tipped their hats to Boone and nodded respectfully to Clara. Mrs. Henderson actually smiled, a small, tight smile, but a smile nonetheless. "See?" Boone murmured. "Not so bad." They made it halfway to the general store before disaster struck. It started with raised voices coming from the hotel, a man and woman arguing loudly enough to carry into the street. Clara wouldn't have paid attention, except the woman's voice was familiar. "I don't care what you think you're owed. I'm not paying another cent." Clara's blood went cold. That was her stepmother Margaret, her father's second wife. The woman he'd married 2 years after Clara's mother died, who'd never liked Clara and made no secret of it. "You signed a contract, Mrs. Whitmore." The man's voice was cold. "The debt stands." "My husband already paid Callahan." "Callahan paid your husband's debt to the bank. This is a separate matter, entirely." Boone's hand tightened on Clara's arm. "We should keep walking." But it was too late. Margaret had spotted them through the hotel window and came storming out, her face red with anger. "You!" She pointed at Clara with a shaking finger. "This is your fault." "Excuse me?" "Your father is in debt again, deeper than before, because of you, because of this ridiculous arrangement. Mrs. Whitmore," Boone's voice cut through her tirade like ice, "I suggest you lower your voice." "Don't you dare tell me what to do. Your wife ruined my family." "My wife saved your family," Boone said quietly. "She married a stranger to clear debts your husband created. If he's in trouble again, that's on him, not Clara." Margaret's mouth worked silently, her eyes darting between them. A small crowd had gathered, watching the confrontation with undisguised interest. "What debt?" Clara asked, her voice steady despite the way her hands shook. "What's he done now?" "Ask him yourself, he's inside." Clara looked at Boone, who nodded slightly. Together, they walked into the hotel, leaving the crowd whispering behind them. Samuel Whitmore sat in the corner of the hotel restaurant, looking like he'd aged another decade since Clara last saw him. His face was gaunt, his hands trembling as he gripped a cup of coffee. When he saw Clara, something crumpled in his expression. "Clara, sweet girl, I'm so sorry." "What did you do?" Clara sat down across from him. Boone remained standing, a silent presence at her shoulder. "The cards. I thought I could win it back. Thought I could fix everything, but..." Samuel's voice broke. "I lost. Lost bad. I owe money to men who won't wait like the bank did." Clara felt something cold settle in her chest. "How much?" $300. The number hung in the air like smoke. $300. More than most families in Blackstone Valley made in a year. More than the original debt that had forced Clara into marriage in the first place. "You promised," Clara whispered. "After everything, after what you made me do, you promised you'd stop gambling." I know, and I'm sorry, but Clara, you have to help me. If I don't pay these men, I don't have to do anything." Clara stood, her chair scraping loudly. "I already saved you once. I gave up everything to fix your mistakes. I'm not doing it again." "Clara, please." She said no. Boone's voice was flat. "You heard her." Samuel's face crumpled. "They'll hurt me. These men, they're not like the bank. That's not my problem anymore." Clara's voice shook, but held firm. "You made your choice. You lied to me. You lied to Boone, and now you're paying for it. But I'm done cleaning up your messes." She turned and walked out before her father could respond. before the tears threatening to spill could fall. Boone followed, his presence solid and reassuring at her back. Outside, the crowd had grown. Margaret stood with several other women, all of them watching Clara with expressions ranging from pity to contempt. "Well," Margaret demanded, "are you going to help him or not?" "No." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Margaret's face went purple. "You ungrateful, selfish! How dare you abandon your own father?" "I didn't abandon him. He abandoned me the day he sold me to pay his debts." Clara's voice rang out, clear and strong. "I was his daughter, not his property, and I'm done pretending otherwise." "You're a disgrace," someone muttered from the crowd. But someone else, Clara couldn't see who, said quietly, "She's right though. Samuel did this to himself." Clara didn't wait to hear more. She climbed into the wagon, her whole body shaking. Boone swung up beside her and gathered the reins, his jaw set in a hard line. They were almost out of town when a figure stepped into the street in front of them. Judith. Boone pulled the horses to a stop. Judith approached Clara's side of the wagon, her expression unreadable. "That was brave," she said quietly. "What you did back there." "It didn't feel brave, it felt necessary." "Sometimes that's the same thing." Judith reached up and squeezed Clara's hand. "I'm proud of you." The words hit Clara like a punch. When was the last time anyone had said that to her? When was the last time she'd done anything worth being proud of? "Thank you," she whispered. Judith stepped back and Boone urged the horses forward. They rode in silence for a long time, the town falling away behind them. Clara stared at her hands in her lap, her mind replaying the confrontation over and over. "You did the right thing," Boone said finally. "Did I? He's my father. He's a grown man who keeps making the same mistakes and expecting other people to fix them." Boone's voice was gentle but firm. "You can love someone and still have boundaries." Clara knew he was right, knew that going back paying her father's debts again would only enable him to keep gambling, keep making bad decisions. But knowing something was right didn't make it hurt less. "What if something happens to him?" she asked quietly. "Then that's on him, not you." They rode the rest of the way home in silence. When they finally reached the ranch, Clara went straight inside and up to her room, closing the door behind her. She sat on the bed and let herself cry for her father, for the family that had never quite been a family, for the girl she'd been who thought she had to fix everything. Boone found her there an hour later. He didn't knock, just opened the door and sat beside her on the bed, pulling her against his chest. "I'm tired," Clara whispered into his shirt. "I'm so tired of all of it." "I know. I keep thinking about my mother, about how disappointed she'd be. Your mother would be proud of you for standing up for yourself. You didn't know her." "No, I know you. And I know that woman raised someone strong enough to walk away from a situation that was destroying her." Boone's arms tightened around her. "That takes courage, Clara." Clara cried harder, all the emotions she'd been holding back since the wedding finally breaking free. Boone held her through it all, his presence steady and solid, not trying to fix anything, just being there. When the tears finally subsided, Clara pulled back and looked at him through swollen eyes. "Thank you," she said, "for defending me, for not making me feel guilty for saying no." "You never have to thank me for that." They sat together in the quiet room, Clara's head on Boone's shoulder, his hands rubbing slow circles on her back. Outside, the winter sun was setting, painting the snow pink and gold. "Boone?" Clara said softly. "Yeah?" "I love you." The words slipped out before she could stop them, surprising them both. Boone went very still, and Clara's heart hammered in sudden panic. Too soon, too much. She'd ruined it. "I love you too," Boone said quietly. "Have for a while now. Just didn't know if you were ready to hear it. Clara lifted her head to look at him. Really? Really. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the last of her tears. You're the strongest person I know, Clara Whitmore, and I'm grateful every damn day that you chose to stay. This time when he kissed her, it was different, deeper, more certain. Clara's hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, and Boone made a low sound in his throat that sent heat racing through her entire body. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Boone rested his forehead against hers. Stay with me tonight, he whispered. Really stay. No more separate rooms. Clara's heart raced. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything. She kissed him again by way of answer, and this time neither of them pulled away. The next morning, Clara woke wrapped in Boone's arms, the winter sunlight streaming through the windows. She felt different, lighter, like something heavy she'd been carrying had finally been set down. Boone was already awake, watching her with soft eyes. Morning, he said. Morning. They lay there for a while, neither wanting to move, just enjoying the warmth and closeness. Eventually, Boone's stomach growled loudly enough to make them both laugh. I should make breakfast, Clara said. In a minute. Boone pulled her closer. Let's just stay here a little longer. Clara settled against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. Outside, she could hear the sounds of the ranch waking up, horses whinnying, chickens clucking, the wind rattling the shutters. What happens now? She asked quietly. Now we live. Boone's voice was certain. We work the ranch, we face whatever comes, and we do it together. What about town? What about my father? Town will talk no matter what we do. Your father, that's his path to walk, not yours. He kissed the top of her head. We focus on us, on building something good here. Clara thought about that, about the life they could build in this house that had once been so empty, about mornings like this and evenings by the fire, about choosing her own happiness instead of sacrificing it for people who'd never appreciated it. Okay, she said. Together. Together. They stayed like that until Boone's stomach growled again, louder this time. Clara laughed and extracted herself from his arms, pulling on her robe. Come on, those animals won't feed themselves. Tyrant, Boone grumbled, but he was smiling. They went downstairs hand in hand, ready to face whatever the day brought. And for the first time since her wedding day, Clara felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. February came with a false promise of spring. 3 days of sunshine melted the top layer of snow, turning the mountain paths to mud and making Clara think maybe the worst of winter was behind them. Then the temperature dropped overnight and everything froze solid, turning the ranch into a treacherous landscape of ice. Clara slipped twice before she even made it to the barn that first morning. The second time she went down hard, landing on her hip with enough force to knock the breath from her lungs. That's it. Boone was beside her instantly, hauling her to her feet. You're staying inside today. I'm fine. You're limping? It's just a bruise. Clara, his voice was firm. Inside now. She wanted to argue, but her hip was already throbbing and she could feel it starting to swell. Boone helped her back to the house, settled her on the couch with her leg elevated, and went out to handle the chores himself despite the ice. Clara spent the morning restless and irritated, her body aching, her mind racing. She hated being useless, hated sitting idle while Boone did everything. By noon, she was pacing despite the pain, checking the window every few minutes to make sure he was all right. When he finally came back in, snow-covered and half-frozen, she had coffee waiting and a hot meal on the stove. I thought I told you to rest, he said, shrugging out of his coat. I rested for about 10 minutes, then I got bored. Boone shook his head, but he was smiling. Stubborn. You say that like it's a bad thing? They ate lunch together, Clara's hips still aching, but manageable. Afterwards, Boone disappeared into his workshop, a small building behind the barn that Clara had barely seen inside. She heard the sound of hammering, the rasp of a saw, and curiosity finally got the better of her. She limped out to the workshop and pushed open the door. Boone looked up from where he was working on what appeared to be a wooden frame, his sleeves rolled up, sawdust dusting his arms. "What are you making?" Clara asked. "Come see." She crossed to the workbench. The frame was beautifully made, joints fitted perfectly together, the wood smooth under her fingers. "It's for a bed," Boone said quietly. "I thought, if you're staying permanently, you should have proper furniture, not just the old pieces that were lying around." Clara's throat tightened. "You're building me a bed?" "Building us a bed." He set down his tools and turned to face her. "I want you in my room, Clara, not as a guest, as my wife, but I want it to feel like yours too." She didn't know what to say to that, didn't know how to put into words what it meant that this rough, quiet man was building them furniture with his own hands, thinking about her comfort, her belonging. "It's beautiful," she managed. "It's not finished yet, still needs sanding and staining." Boone wiped his hands on his pants. "But I wanted you to see it, make sure it's what you want. It's perfect." They stood close in the small workshop, the smell of fresh cut wood surrounding them. Boone's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing across her skin. "I love you," he said simply. "I love you too." The words came easier each time she said them, felt more real, more true. That night, lying in bed together, Clara asked the question that had been bothering her since their last trip to town. What if my father really does get hurt? What if those men he owes, then he'll face the consequences of his choices? Boone's voice was gentle but unyielding. "You can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved, Clara. And your father, he's had plenty of chances to change." "I know, but he's still my father." "I know that too." Boone pulled her closer. "And if something happens, if you need to go to him, I'll understand. But you don't owe him another sacrifice, not after everything." Clara nodded against his chest, knowing he was right, but still feeling the pull of old guilt, old obligations. It was hard to let go of a lifetime of being told she was responsible for fixing her family's problems. "When do you think spring will really come?" she asked, changing the subject. "March, maybe April. Why?" "Just wondering." Clara traced patterns on his chest with her finger. "Wondering what happens when the snow melts and we can actually leave the mountain again. Worried you'll get bored of me?" "Never. But I was thinking, we can't hide up here forever. Eventually we'll have to face town again, face all the questions and gossip." Boone was quiet for a moment. "What if we gave them something else to talk about?" "Like what?" "Like the fact that this marriage is real, that we chose each other." His hand stilled on her shoulder. "I've been thinking when I paid your father's debt, I didn't do it the right way. I should have just given him the money outright, not tied it to you." "Boone, let me finish. I can't undo that. Can't change how this started. But I can change what it is now." He shifted to look at her in the dim light. "I want to give you something that's yours, not ours. Yours. Something no one can take away. Something that proves you're not property." Clara's heart started beating faster. "What are you talking about?" "Land. I own 250 acres free and clear. I want to deed half of it to you. In your name, with water rights and grazing access and everything that comes with it." Clara sat up, staring at him. "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious. Boone, that's your livelihood, your home. You can't just give away half of it." I'm not giving it away. I'm sharing it with my wife. His voice was firm. This way, if anything happens to me, you're protected. The land is yours. And if anyone in town wants to say, you're just some woman I bought, they'll have to explain how a bought woman owns 125 acres of mountain property. Clara's mind reeled. She thought about what that would mean. Actual ownership, actual security. Not depending on anyone, not being vulnerable to someone else's decisions or debts. Being able to stand on her own 2 feet in a way she'd never been able to before. When? She whispered. Soon as we can get to a lawyer. Probably won't be until March when the road's clear. Boone reached for her hand. I want to do this right, Clara. Want everyone to know you're here. Because you choose to be. Not because you have to be. She kissed him then, hard and desperate, and full of emotion she couldn't put into words. Boone pulled her close and they stopped talking for a while. Later, as Clara drifted towards sleep, she thought about the woman she'd been 4 months ago, scared and ashamed, standing at an altar in a dress that didn't fit, marrying a stranger to save a family that had never really valued her. That woman felt like someone else entirely. The ice lasted a week before another storm hit, dumping 2 more feet of snow and trapping them inside for 3 days straight. Clara didn't mind. She'd grown to love the enforced isolation, the way the world narrowed down to just the 2 of them and the ranch. They spent the days cooking together, playing cards, reading aloud from Boone's collection of books. Clara discovered he had a surprisingly good reading voice and made him go through an entire novel while she mended clothes and listened. On the second night of the storm, when the wind was howling so loud they could barely hear each other speak, Boone pulled out a leather-bound journal. What's that? Clara asked. Sarah's. His voice was quiet. Her diary. I haven't been able to open it since she died. Clara set down her mending. You don't have to show me. I want to. Boone opened the journal carefully like it might break. I've been thinking about what you said. About carrying guilt for things we can't control. I think maybe it's time I let some of it go. He read passages aloud. Sarah's observations about the ranch, her excitement over being pregnant, her hopes for their daughter. His voice cracked several times, but he kept going, and Clara sat quietly and listened, giving him the space to grieve. She sounds wonderful, Clara said, when he finally closed the journal. She was. Boone traced the worn leather cover. But she's gone, and I'm still here. And I think she'd want me to be happy. Would want me to move forward instead of staying frozen in the past. I think she would too. I loved her. I need you to know that. I do know that. But what I feel for you, Boone looked up, meeting Clara's eyes. It's different. Not less, just different. She was my first love. You're my second chance. Clara moved to sit beside him, taking his hand. You're mine too. My second chance at a life worth living. They held each other while the storm raged outside. 2 broken people learning how to be whole together. When the weather finally cleared, Boone announced he needed to ride out to check on the north pasture fence line. The snow had damaged several posts and he wanted to assess the repairs needed before spring arrived. I'll come with you, Clara said. It's a long ride, 4 hours at least. I can handle it. Boone studied her for a moment, then nodded. Bundle up warm, we'll pack food. They set out mid-morning on 2 of the steadier horses, the mountain air crisp and cold, but beautiful. Clara hadn't been this far from the house since arriving, and she was struck by how vast Boone's land was. Miles of forest and meadow and rolling hills, all of it silent and snow-covered. You really own all of this? She asked as they rode. Everything you can see from here to that ridge line, Boone pointed. 250 acres, half of which will be yours soon. The reality of it hit Clara anew. She'd gone from owning nothing, not even the clothes on her back really, to owning more land than most people in Blackstone Valley would see in their lifetime. They reached the damaged fence by early afternoon. Several posts had indeed come down, tangled in fallen branches and buried under snow. Boone dismounted and started assessing the damage while Clara stayed on her horse, surveying the area. That's when she saw the smoke. "Boone!" Her voice was sharp. "Look." He followed her gaze. In the distance, barely visible through the trees, a thin column of smoke rose into the clear sky. "That's on my land," Boone said quietly. "Or it should be. No one has rights to be out here. Could be a campfire. Travelers, maybe? Maybe." But Boone's expression had gone hard. "Stay here." "Like hell I will." They rode toward the smoke together, moving cautiously. As they got closer, Clara could make out voices. Men's voices, rough and loud. Boone held up a hand for her to stop, then dismounted and crept forward on foot. Clara waited, her heart pounding. After what felt like forever, Boone returned, his jaw set in anger. "Poachers," he said quietly. "3 of them. They've got traps set all over this section, probably been coming up here for weeks, while the snow was too deep for me to check. What are you going to do? Run them off? This is my land and they're stealing from it." Boone checked his rifle. "Stay back. I don't want you anywhere near this. If it goes bad." "Boone, please, Clara. I can't focus on dealing with them if I'm worried about you." Clara wanted to argue, but the look in his eyes stopped her. She nodded reluctantly and Boone disappeared back into the trees. She heard shouting almost immediately, Boone's voice commanding and hard. Other voices responding with anger and challenges. Clara's hands tightened on her reins, every muscle tense. Then a gunshot cracked through the air. Clara's heart stopped. Without thinking, she kicked her horse forward, crashing through the underbrush toward the sound. She burst into a clearing to find Boone standing with his rifle pointed at 3 men who looked like they'd been living rough for weeks. One of them had a gun too, but it was pointed at the ground. "I said get off my land," Boone was saying, his voice deadly calm. "Take your traps and go. Now." "This is open range," one of the men spat. "You can't." "This is private property and you're trespassing. You've got 10 seconds before I stop being polite." The men looked at each other, seemed to calculate their odds, and apparently decided Boone wasn't bluffing. They started gathering their traps, moving slowly, resentfully. That's when Clara recognized one of them. James Whitmore, her brother. He looked up at the same moment, his eyes widening when he saw her. "Clara? James?" Her voice came out flat. "What are you doing here? What's it look like? Trying to make some money?" His eyes were bloodshot, his face gaunt. "Since you decided to abandon the family, someone has to." "I didn't abandon anyone," Clara cut him off. "I paid for father's mistakes once. I'm not doing it again." "You're living up here in luxury while the rest of us starve." "I'm living up here because I worked for it," Clara said sharply. "Because I made a choice. You could make choices too. Like not poaching on someone else's land." James's face darkened. "You always thought you were better than us." "No, I just finally figured out I didn't have to be worse than myself to make you feel better." Boone had been watching this exchange silently, his rifle never wavering. Now he spoke up. "You've got 5 seconds, then I start shooting." The 3 men grabbed their remaining traps and ran. James shot Clara one last hateful look before disappearing into the trees with the others. When the sound of their retreat faded, Boone finally lowered his rifle and turned to Clara. "I thought I told you to stay back. I heard a gunshot. I thought..." Her voice broke. "I thought they'd hurt you." Boone crossed to her and pulled her down from her horse, holding her tight. "I'm fine. I fired into the air to make a point. That's all." Clara pressed her face into his chest, her whole body shaking. "That was my brother," My own brother, trespassing on your land, stealing from you. Your family's choices aren't your responsibility, remember? I know, but it still hurts. I know it does. Boone pulled back to look at her. But Clara, you did the right thing, standing up to him, not letting him guilt you into feeling bad for living your life. Clara nodded, but the encounter had shaken her. She'd known her family was struggling, but seeing James like that, desperate and angry and willing to steal, drove home just how far things had fallen. They rode back to the ranch in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. When they finally arrived home, Clara went straight to the kitchen and started making bread, kneading the dough with more force than necessary. Boone watched from the doorway. Talk to me. I don't know what to say. Every time I think I've made peace with leaving, something happens to remind me that I'm connected to them, whether I want to be or not. You're connected by blood, not by obligation. It doesn't feel that simple. It is, though. Boone moved closer. Your father made his choices. Your brother made his. You made yours. Those are separate things. Clara slammed the dough down on the counter. Why does it have to be so hard? Why can't I just stop caring? Because you're a good person. Good people don't stop caring just because it's easier. Being good is exhausting. Boone almost smiled. Yeah, it is. Clara shaped the bread into loaves with shaking hands, her mind still churning. What if they come back? What if they try again? Then I'll run them off again. As many times as it takes. His voice was firm. This is our land, Clara. We get to decide who's welcome on it. Our land. The words settled something in Clara's chest. Not Boone's land that she was borrowing, not her father's land that she'd lost. Their land. Something they were building together. She slid the loaves into the oven and turned to face Boone. When can we go see that lawyer about the deed? Roads should be passable in a few weeks. Why? Because I want it legal. Want it official. Want to walk into town and know that I own something no one can take away from me. Clara's voice was fierce. I want my name on that deed. Boone crossed to her and took her flour-dusted hands in his. Then that's what we'll do. First clear day in March, we ride to town and make it official. And then we come home and keep building the life we want, together. Clara kissed him, tasting salt and determination and the future they were creating. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. I'm scared, she whispered, of going back to town, of seeing my family again, of what people will say. I know, but you're not the same person who left 4 months ago. You're stronger now, braver. I don't feel brave. Brave people never do. Boone's hands tightened on hers. But you faced down your father, stood up to your brother, left behind a life that was killing you to build something better. That's the definition of brave, Clara. She wanted to believe him, wanted to feel as strong as he seemed to think she was. But doubt still gnawed at her, whispering that she was just playing at being someone new, that eventually she'd revert back to the scared, ashamed girl everyone in Blackstone Valley expected her to be. That night, Clara had the nightmare again. The one where the bank took her family's land and it was all her fault. Where she stood watching while men carried away everything they owned. Where her father pointed at her and said, "This is because of you." She woke gasping, her heart racing. Boone was already awake beside her, pulling her close. Same dream? He asked quietly. Clara nodded against his chest. I thought they'd stopped. Nightmares don't work on a schedule. They come back when we're stressed. He kissed her hair. You want to talk about it? It's always the same. The bank taking everything. My father blaming me. Me being powerless to stop it. But you're not powerless anymore. Aren't I? James is out there poaching because my family's desperate. My father owes money to dangerous people. And I'm up here safe while they fall apart. You're up here because you saved yourself. That's not a crime, Clara. It feels like one. Boone was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was gentle but unyielding. What do you want to do? Really? If you could wave a magic wand and fix everything, what would that look like? Clara thought about it. I want them to be okay. I want my father to stop gambling. I want my brothers to find honest work. I want my stepmother to stop being so angry all the time. All things you can't control. I know. So what can you control? Clara closed her eyes. How I respond, whether I let their choices destroy the life I'm building. Exactly. Boone's arms tightened around her. You can feel bad for them and still protect yourself. Both things can be true. Clara knew he was right. Knew that she couldn't save her family from themselves, couldn't fix problems she didn't create. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally were two very different things. I love you, she whispered. I love you too, more than you know. They lay awake together until dawn, holding each other against the darkness and the doubts. And when morning came, Clara got up and faced another day, 'cause that's what you did. You got up and you kept going, and you built the life you wanted, one day at a time, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. March arrived with the first real signs of spring. The snow began melting in earnest, turning the paths to mud and revealing brown grass underneath. Birds returned, filling the air with sound. The days grew longer, warmer, and the roads finally cleared enough for travel. We should go tomorrow, Boone said one morning over breakfast. Before another storm hits. Clara's stomach clenched. Tomorrow. Unless you want to wait longer. She thought about it. About putting it off another week, another month. But she knew she was just delaying the inevitable. They needed supplies. Needed to see the lawyer about the deed. Needed to face town eventually. No, she said. Tomorrow is fine. They left at dawn. The wagon loaded with beef and a list of supplies they needed. Clara wore her best dress, still plain and simple but clean and mended. She'd braided her hair carefully and tried to calm her racing heart. Blackstone Valley looked different in early spring. Less harsh, almost welcoming, but Clara knew better than to trust appearances. They sold the beef first, getting a good price from the butcher. Then they headed to the general store, where Mr. Peterson greeted them with cautious politeness. Callahan, Mrs. Callahan, what can I get for you today? Boone handed over the list. While Peterson gathered the supplies, Clara became aware of the other customers watching them, whispering. But the whispers felt different now, less cruel, more curious. They were loading the wagon when someone called Clara's name. She turned to find Judith hurrying across the street, her face bright with relief. Clara, I'm so glad you're here. I've been wanting to talk to you. Is something wrong? No? Well, yes, but... Judith glanced at Boone. Could I borrow Clara for a few minutes? There's something I need to discuss with her, woman to woman. Boone looked at Clara, who nodded. I'll be fine. I'll meet you at the lawyer's office. He hesitated, then nodded and headed down the street. Judith grabbed Clara's arm and pulled her toward the cafe. What's going on? Clara asked. Your father? Judith said quietly. Well, he's in trouble. Bad trouble. Those men he owes money to, they came to the house last night. Beat him pretty badly. Clara's blood went cold. How badly? Broken ribs, black eye. They said next time they'd do worse. Judith's eyes were desperate. Clara, I know you said you were done helping him, and I understand why, but he's still your father. He could die if... Stop. Clara held up her hand. Just stop. Where is he now? At home? Margaret's with him? Clara closed her eyes, feeling the old pull of obligation warring with the new boundaries she'd set. Part of her wanted to run to her father, to fix this the way she'd always fixed things. But another part, the part that had grown stronger over the winter, knew that wasn't the answer. I'll go see him, she said finally. But I'm not paying his debts. That's not changing. Judith looked like she wanted to argue but nodded instead. Thank you. Clara found Boone at the lawyer's office and explained the situation. His jaw tightened, but he didn't try to stop her. I'm coming with you, was all he said. They rode to the Whitmore house together, Clara's heart hammering the whole way. The place looked even more run down than she remembered. Paint peeling, fence posts broken, the whole property radiating neglect. Margaret answered the door, her face hard. Come to gloat? I came to see my father, Clara said evenly. Margaret stepped aside reluctantly. Samuel Whitmore lay on the couch in the front room, his face a mess of bruises, his breathing shallow and pained. He looked up when Clara entered, and something crumpled in his expression. Clara, sweet girl, I'm so sorry. Don't. Clara's voice was firm. Don't apologize. Don't ask for help. Just tell me the truth. Are you going to stop gambling? Samuel's eyes filled with tears. I want to. I swear I want to. That's not what I asked. Are you going to stop? Silence. Clara felt something inside her break and heal at the same time. She looked at this man who'd raised her, who'd loved her in his own broken way, who'd also sold her to save himself, and she felt sad. Just sad. I can't save you, she said quietly. I won't. But I'll give you one thing. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a piece of paper with an address. There's a man in Silver Creek who helps people with gambling problems. His name is Daniel Morrison. He helped a friend of my mother's years ago. Samuel took the paper with shaking hands. Clara, that's all I can do. The rest is up to you. She turned to leave, then paused. I hope you get help, Father. I really do. But whether you do or not, I'm done carrying your burdens. She walked out without looking back, Boone at her side. They made it halfway down the path before Clara started crying. Not from grief, but from relief. From finally letting go. Boone held her while she cried, there in the muddy path, not caring who saw. I'm proud of you, he said quietly. Why? I didn't fix anything? You set a boundary, you held it, and you did it with kindness. His hands cupped her face. That's more than most people can do. They went back to the lawyer's office where Boone made good on his promise. The deed was drawn up, signed, notarized, 125 acres of mountain property, water rights included, in Clara Callahan's name. When the lawyer handed her the official document, Clara stared at it for a long moment. Her name, her land, her future, secured. Thank you, she whispered to Boone. You earned it. They left town with their supplies and the deed, the sun setting behind them as they climbed back into the mountains. Clara kept touching the document in her pocket, making sure it was real. What happens now? She asked as the ranch came into view. Boone smiled. Now we live our lives together. And for the first time since her wedding day, Clara believed it. Spring arrived in earnest 3 weeks after they got the deed, transforming the mountain from a landscape of white and gray into something alive with color. Green shoots pushed through the melting snow, wildflowers bloomed in sudden bursts of purple and yellow, and the sound of running water filled the air as streams swelled with snowmelt. Clara stood on the porch one morning in late March, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold, and felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Not happiness exactly, that came and went, dependent on the day, the weather, whether the chickens were cooperating, but peace, the deep, settled knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged. You're up early, Boone said from the doorway, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. Couldn't sleep, kept thinking about the garden. What garden? Clara turned to face him, suddenly excited. The one I want to plant. Over there, by the south side of the house where it gets the most sun, vegetables mostly, but maybe some flowers too, herbs. We could have fresh food all summer. Boone handed her coffee, smiling. You've been planning this? For weeks. I just didn't know if you'd think it was a good idea. Clara. His voice was gentle. You own half this ranch. You don't need my permission to plant a garden. The words still gave her a thrill every time she heard them. You own half this ranch. She'd kept the deed in her dresser drawer, taking it out sometimes just to look at her name written in official legal script. I know, but I still wanted to ask. She sipped her coffee. We're partners? That means deciding things together? Then yes, plant your garden. I'll help you turn the soil. They spent the morning working side by side, Boone breaking up the hard earth with a spade while Clara pulled rocks and roots. It was backbreaking work, but satisfying in a way Clara had never experienced before. She was building something, creating something, not fixing someone else's mistakes or cleaning up someone else's mess, but making something new from nothing. You're smiling, Boone observed, leaning on his spade. Am I? Like you just discovered gold? Clara looked at the plot of turned earth, imagining it full of tomatoes and beans and carrots. Maybe I did. They worked until noon when the sun grew too hot and they retreated inside for lunch. Clara made sandwiches while Boone washed the dirt from his hands, and they ate on the porch, watching the mountains shimmer in the heat. I got a letter yesterday, Boone said casually, from the Cattle Association. They're having a meeting next month. Want ranchers to come talk about grazing rights and water access. Clara's stomach tightened. In town? Yeah. Are you going? Was thinking about it, but only if you come with me. He met her eyes. I want people to see us together. See that we're a team. Clara thought about facing Blackstone Valley again, about the whispers and stares, but she also thought about the deed in her drawer, about the garden she was planting, about the woman she'd become over the past 5 months. Okay, she said, I'll go. The meeting was scheduled for the second Saturday in April. Clara spent the week before anxiously preparing, washing her best dress, practicing what she might say if someone spoke to her, trying to calm the knot of nerves in her stomach. The night before they were supposed to leave, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing through every possible disaster. Talk to me, Boone said quietly beside her. I'm scared. Of what specifically? Clara thought about it. Of being that girl again. The one everyone mocked. The one who couldn't defend herself. You're not her anymore. But what if I am? What if the second someone says something cruel, I just fold? Go back to being small and scared and ashamed? Boone rolled to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. You won't? How can you be sure? Because I've watched you face your father, stand up to your brother, set boundaries you never thought you could set. You've changed, Clara, and that's not something you can undo just by walking into town. Clara wanted to believe him, but the old fears ran deep, carved into her bones by years of cruelty. What if they're right, though? She whispered. What if I am just the fat bride you bought? What if... Stop! Boone's voice was firm. You want to know what I see when I look at you? I see the woman who saved my life, who brought this house back to life, who works harder than anyone I know and never complains, who's kind even when she has no reason to be. His hand found hers in the darkness. I see my partner, my equal, my wife, and anyone who sees less than that is blind. Clara felt tears slip down her cheeks. I don't know if I'm as strong as you think I am. You're stronger, you just don't see it yet. They rode into town the next morning under clear blue skies. The Cattle Association meeting was being held at the community hall, and when Clara and Boone arrived, the place was already half full of ranchers and their families. Clara felt every eye in the room turn toward them as they walked in, heard the whispers start immediately, but this time, instead of shrinking, she kept her head up and her hand in Boone's. They found seats near the back. Around them, people shifted and murmured. Clara recognized most of them, Mrs. Henderson and her daughters, Thomas Mercer looking sullen in the corner, the Peterson family who ran the general store. Even her cousin Judith was there with her husband. The meeting started with boring talk about water rights and fence disputes. Clara tried to pay attention, but her mind kept wandering, hyper-aware of every glance, every whisper. Then the discussion turned to land ownership, and the association president mentioned something about recent property transfers. Clara felt Boone tense beside her. In fact, the president continued, we have a new landowner among us. Clara Callahan recently acquired title to 125 acres of prime mountain grazing land. Mrs. Callahan, would you like to stand and be recognized? Every head in the room swiveled toward Clara. Her heart hammered. This was it. The moment where she could shrink and hide or stand and claim her place. She stood. The room erupted in whispers. Clara could see the shock on people's faces, the confusion. How had the fat bride everyone mocked ended up owning a significant piece of mountain property? Thank you, Clara said, her voice steadier than she felt. She sat back down, her hands shaking. Beside her, Boone squeezed her knee under the table. Proud. After the meeting, people approached them cautiously. Some congratulated Clara on her land acquisition. Some asked careful questions about how the ranch was doing. A few even apologized awkwardly and indirectly for how they'd treated her before. Clara accepted it all with grace she didn't entirely feel, keeping her responses polite but distant. These people hadn't earned her warmth. They'd only earned her civility. They were leaving when Margaret appeared, looking haggard and angry. So this is what you've been doing, she said, blocking their path. Playing lady of the manor while your father suffers. Clara felt Boone tense beside her, but she laid a hand on his arm. This was hers to handle. My father is suffering because of his own choices, Clara said evenly, not mine. You abandoned him, abandoned all of us. I saved myself. There's a difference. You're selfish, ungrateful, after everything what? Clara's voice rose slightly. After everything he did for me? Like selling me to pay his gambling debts? Like lying to my husband about whether I agreed to the marriage? Like never once asking what I wanted or needed? Margaret's face went red. He's your father? Yes, and I gave him information that could help him. I pointed him towards someone who helps people with gambling problems. What he does with that is up to him. Clara met Margaret's eyes. But I'm done sacrificing my happiness for people who never valued it. She walked past Margaret without waiting for a response. Boone at her side. Her hands were shaking, but her head was high. That was brave, Boone said quietly once they were outside. That was terrifying. Same thing. They loaded their supplies and headed home, but Clara couldn't shake the confrontation, couldn't stop replaying it in her mind, wondering if she'd been too harsh, too cold. You did the right thing, Boone said, reading her thoughts. Setting boundaries isn't cruel. It's necessary. Then why does it feel so bad? Because you're a good person. Good people feel bad when they have to hurt others, even when it's in self-defense. Clara thought about that as they climbed back into the mountains, about the difference between being good and being a doormat, about how you could love someone and still protect yourself from them. When they got home, Clara went straight to her garden and started planting seeds, tomatoes and beans and carrots, each one placed carefully in the dark earth. It was methodical, soothing work that quieted her racing mind. Boone found her there an hour later, dirt under her fingernails, tears streaking her cheeks. "Hey." He knelt beside her. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. Everything." Clara sat back on her heels. "I just keep thinking about my father, about how he looked all beaten and broken. And I wonder if I'm making a mistake, if I should help him one more time." "And then what? He gambles again, gets in trouble again, and you save him again? How many times before it stops?" "I don't know." "I do. It never stops. Not as long as you keep enabling it." Boone's voice was gentle but firm. "You gave him a resource, a way to get real help. That's more than most people would do after what he put you through." "What if he dies though? What if those men kill him and I could have prevented it?" "And that's tragic, but it's still not your fault." Boone took her dirty hands in his. "Clara, you can't live your life responsible for other people's choices. You'll destroy yourself trying." Clara knew he was right, knew it in her bones, but letting go of that ingrained sense of responsibility was harder than any physical labor she'd ever done. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too, even when you're covered in dirt and crying in the garden." "Especially then?" "Especially then." Clara leaned against him and let herself cry properly, for her father, for the family she'd lost, for the girl she used to be who thought she had to fix everything. When the tears finally stopped, she felt lighter, emptier, but in a good way. Like she'd set down a weight she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten it was there. That night, lying in bed, Boone asked her something he'd never asked before. "Do you regret it? Any of it?" Clara thought carefully. "I regret that it had to happen the way it did. I regret that my father lied and manipulated us both. I regret the pain and the shame." She paused. "But I don't regret where we ended up. I don't regret us." "Good. 'Cause I don't either." They made love slowly that night, taking their time, relearning each other's bodies, and afterwards, wrapped in Boone's arms, Clara felt something she'd never felt before in her entire life. Whole. Not perfect, not fixed, but whole, complete in herself, not needing anyone else to validate her existence or worth. Spring turned to early summer, and Clara's garden flourished. Green shoots became healthy plants, heavy with vegetables. The ranch thrived too. New calves were born. The horses were healthy. The work was constant but satisfying. Clara had taken to riding out with Boone sometimes when he checked the far pastures. She'd learned the boundaries of their land, learned which streams ran year-round and which dried up in summer, learned to spot signs of trouble before it became serious. She was a rancher now, a landowner. Not just someone's daughter or someone's wife, but her own person with her own skills and knowledge. One afternoon in June, they were riding back from checking the north fence when they saw a rider approaching. Clara tensed, but Boone put a calming hand on her arm. "It's Judith." Her cousin looked exhausted when she pulled her horse alongside theirs, her face streaked with dust and worry. "Thank goodness I found you," she said. "Clara, it's your father. He's asking for you." Clara's stomach dropped. "Is he dying?" "No, but he's in bad shape. Those men came back, beat him worse this time. He's laid up in bed and he keeps saying he needs to talk to you. Says it's important." Clara looked at Boone, who shrugged slightly. "Your choice?" She thought about it. About boundaries and self-protection and all the growth she'd done. About the fact that she didn't owe her father anything. But she also thought about closure. About hearing whatever he had to say and then being able to move forward without wondering. "I'll come," she said finally. "But just to listen. I'm not fixing anything." They rode to the Whitmore house together, all three of them. The place looked even worse than before. Windows broken, fence completely collapsed, the whole property radiating decay and desperation. Samuel Whitmore was in bed, his face a mass of fresh bruises, his breathing labored. When he saw Clara, his eyes filled with tears. "Clara, my girl, I didn't think you'd come. I'm here to listen, that's all." I know. Samuel struggled to sit up, wincing. "I want you to know I went to that man. Daniel Morrison, the one you told me about." Clara's breath caught. "You did? Last month? Been meeting with him twice a week." Samuel's voice was rough. "It's hard. Harder than I thought it would be. But I haven't gambled in 6 weeks." "That's good, Father. I know it doesn't fix anything, doesn't erase what I did to you, but I wanted you to know I'm trying." His hand reached for hers, and Clara let him take it. "I'm so sorry, Clara, for selling you, for lying, for putting you in that position. You deserved better." Clara felt tears building, but refused to let them fall. "Yes, I did. Are you happy with Callahan?" "I am." "Good, that's good." Samuel's grip tightened. "I want you to know something. When I made that arrangement, I told myself I was doing it for the family. But the truth is, I was doing it for me, to save myself from facing the consequences of my actions. And I used you to do it. I know. I'm trying to be better. Don't know if I can be, but I'm trying." Clara looked at this broken man who'd raised her, who'd loved her imperfectly, who'd ultimately betrayed her. And she felt sad. Just sad. Not angry anymore. Not obligated, just sad for what could have been and never was. "I hope you succeed," she said quietly. "I really do. But, Father, I can't be part of your recovery. Can't check on you or help you or take responsibility for whether you stay sober. That has to be on you." Samuel nodded, tears streaming down his battered face. "I understand. I'll pray for you, though, in my own way." Clara stood. "And if you need that man's information again, Judith knows where to find it." She left without looking back, Boone and Judith following. Outside, Clara took a deep breath of clean mountain air and felt something release in her chest, some final thread of obligation severing. "You okay?" Boone asked. "Yeah, I think I am." Judith hugged her tight. "Thank you for coming, and Clara, you were right about everything, about setting boundaries, about not sacrificing yourself. Took me long enough to figure it out. Better late than never." They rode home as the sun set, painting the mountains in shades of pink and gold. Clara watched the light play across the landscape, her property, her home, and felt something settle deep in her bones. She was done carrying her father's burdens, done letting her past dictate her future, done being anything other than exactly who she chose to be. That night, Boone finished the bed he'd been building. They moved it into their room together, replacing the old frame with this new one he'd made by hand. Clara ran her fingers over the smooth wood, admiring the craftsmanship. "It's beautiful," she said. "It's ours." Boone pulled her close. "Everything in this house is ours now. Everything we've built together." They christened the new bed properly and afterwards lay tangled together in the darkness, listening to the summer wind through the open windows. "Boone?" Clara said softly. "Thank you for seeing something in me worth saving when I couldn't see it myself." "You saved yourself, Clara. I just gave you space to do it. We saved each other then." "Yeah, I think we did." Summer deepened and the ranch prospered. Clara's garden produced more vegetables than they could eat, so she started preserving them for winter, canning tomatoes, drying beans, pickling cucumbers. The work was endless but satisfying. She'd also started teaching herself to ride better, pushing past her initial fear to become competent on horseback. Boone taught her to rope and brand, to read weather patterns, to think like a rancher instead of just someone who lived on a ranch. In late July, they made another trip to town for supplies. This time, Clara walked the streets with her head high, acknowledging greetings, but not stopping for long conversations. She didn't need these people's approval anymore. Didn't need their acceptance or validation. She had her own land, her own life, her own worth. At the general store, Mrs. Henderson approached Clara while Boone was examining saddles. "Mrs. Callahan," she said formally, "I wanted to apologize for how we treated you before." Clara studied the older woman. "Why now?" "Because I was wrong. We all were. We judged you for things that weren't your fault, and we mocked you when we should have shown kindness." Mrs. Henderson's voice was sincere. "You didn't deserve that." "No, I didn't. I hope you can forgive us. You can." Clara thought about it, about forgiveness and what it meant, about whether these people had earned it or were just offering it now that she had property and status. "I appreciate the apology," she said finally. "But Mrs. Henderson, forgiveness isn't something you get just by asking. It's something you earn by changing your behavior." The older woman nodded slowly. "That's fair." Clara walked away feeling powerful. Not angry or vindictive, just powerful. She'd set a boundary and held it, had refused to make things easy for someone who'd made things hard for her. That evening, as they drove home with the wagon full of supplies, Clara told Boone about the conversation. "How do you feel about it?" he asked. "Good. Strong. Like I finally understand that I don't owe anyone my forgiveness just because they decided they want it. You've changed so much since October. Have I? Or am I just finally becoming who I always could have been if people hadn't spent my whole life telling me I was worthless?" Boone reached over and took her hand. "Both. You've changed because you had the courage to become yourself." Clara squeezed his fingers, watching the mountains rise up around them as they climbed toward home. Their home. The place they'd built together, from loneliness and desperation into something solid and real and good. August came with scorching heat that turned the meadows brown and made the streams run low. Clara spent her days in the garden, harvesting vegetables and fighting off deer. Boone worked from dawn to dusk, checking water sources and moving cattle to better grazing. They were both exhausted by the time evening came, but it was a good exhaustion, the kind that came from honest work, from building something worth building. One night, as they sat on the porch watching lightning flash in the distant mountains, Clara said something she'd been thinking about for weeks. "I want to go see my father again." Boone looked at her in surprise. "Why?" "Because I want to see if he's still sober, if he's really changing, and if he is." Clara paused. "If he is, I want to tell him I'm proud of him, not forgive him necessarily, but acknowledge the effort. And if he's not sober, then at least I'll know, won't spend time wondering." They rode to the Whitmore place the next week. Clara's stomach was in knots the whole way, not knowing what she'd find. What she found was Samuel Whitmore in his garden, sober and clear-eyed, planting late-season vegetables. He looked up when they arrived, surprise and hope crossing his face. "Clara? Father?" She dismounted, studying him. He looked healthier than she'd seen him in years. Thinner, but in a good way. Cleaner, present. "I didn't expect to see you. I wanted to check on you, see how you were doing." Samuel set down his spade. 93 days sober, still meeting with Daniel twice a week. Margaret left last month, said she couldn't stand watching me not drink. He smiled sadly. Turns out she liked having someone to blame for her own unhappiness. "I'm sorry." "Don't be, it's for the best." He gestured at the garden. "Learned this from you, actually. Heard you were growing vegetables. Figured if my daughter could start over, maybe I could too. Clara felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but something close to it. The garden looks good. Not as good as yours probably, but I'm learning. Samuel met her eyes. I know I can't undo what I did. Can't give you back those months of fear and shame, but I want you to know I see it now. See what I took from you. And I'm trying to be someone who wouldn't do that again. That's all anyone can do. Try to be better. They stood in uncomfortable silence for a moment. Then Samuel spoke again. Your brothers asked about you. They're working at the mill now. Honest work. Seems like maybe we're all trying to figure out how to live right. That's good to hear. Would you want to have supper sometime? Here? Or at your place? I don't care. Just to talk. Get to know each other again as the people we are now instead of the people we were. Clara looked at Boone, who shrugged slightly. Your choice. She thought about it, about whether she wanted her father in her life in any capacity, whether she could handle the complicated mess of loving someone who'd hurt her. Maybe, she said finally. Not now, but maybe someday. If you stay sober, if you keep doing the work. Fair enough. Samuel smiled, and for the first time in years, it reached his eyes. I'll earn it, however long it takes. Clara nodded and mounted her horse. As they rode away, Boone asked quietly, how do you feel? Hopeful, cautiously hopeful. Clara watched the road ahead. Maybe people can change, maybe it's never too late to choose better. Maybe you did. Change from someone closed off and grieving to someone who could love again. You helped with that. We helped each other. That's what this is. Clara reached over and took his hand. Two broken people putting each other back together. Is that what we're doing? I think so. And I think we're doing pretty well at it. September arrived with cooler temperatures and the first hint of autumn in the air. Clara spent her days preserving the last of her garden harvest, filling the root cellar with jars of tomatoes and pickles and jam. The ranch was thriving, the cattle were healthy, the hay was cut and stored, the fences were repaired. They'd worked hard all summer, and it showed. One evening, as Clara was canning the last batch of tomatoes, Boone came into the kitchen with a letter. This came for you, he said, handing it over. Clara wiped her hands and opened it. Inside was a note from Judith. Clara, thought you should know. Your father has been sober for 4 months now. He's working at the mill with your brothers, paying off his debts, slowly but steadily. He asks about you every time I see him, says he's proud of you for building the life you deserved. Thought you'd want to know. Jay. Clara folded the letter carefully and set it aside. Good news? Boone asked. Yeah, good news. She went back to her canning. My father's still sober, still trying. How do you feel about that? Clara thought about it. Glad, relieved, still cautious, but hopeful. Think you'll have that supper with him? Maybe. Eventually, when I'm ready. She sealed the last jar and set it aside. But not because I owe him anything, because I choose to. That's the difference between obligation and grace. What is? Choosing to extend kindness when you don't have to. That's grace, what you were doing before. Sacrificing yourself because you thought you had to. That's obligation. They're not the same thing. Clara moved to stand between Boone's knees, her hands on his shoulders. When did you get so wise? I'm not wise, I just pay attention. She kissed him, tasting coffee and the mint he chewed while he worked. When they broke apart, Clara rested her forehead against his. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For being patient with me, for letting me figure things out at my own pace, for never pushing me to forgive or forget before I was ready. That's not something you thank someone for. That's just basic respect. A lot of people don't understand the difference. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other in the warm kitchen while the September sun set outside. Clara thought about the woman she'd been a year ago. Scared, ashamed, convinced she was worthless. That woman felt like a stranger now. "You know what I realized?" Clara said softly. "What?" "I spent my whole life thinking I needed to earn love, earn respect, earn my place in the world. But that's not how it works. You don't earn worth, you just have it. Everyone does. Took you a while to figure that out. Better late than never. Much better." October arrived with the anniversary of their wedding approaching. Clara watched the leaves turn gold and red, watched the first frost settle on the grass, and thought about how much had changed in 1 year. She'd gone from a woman sold to pay her father's debts to a landowner in her own right, from someone who couldn't imagine being happy to someone who woke up grateful most mornings, from scared and small to strong and settled. The night before their anniversary, Boone surprised her with a gift. A photograph in a simple frame, the two of them standing in front of the ranch house, Clara's hand in his, both of them smiling. "When did you have this taken?" Clara asked, surprised. "Last time we were in town, asked Judith to take it. Wanted to remember this, us, how far we've come." Clara stared at the image. She'd avoided photographs most of her life, hated seeing herself captured in a moment, preserved forever in a body she was ashamed of. But this woman in the photograph didn't look ashamed. She looked happy, confident, whole. "I love it," Clara whispered. "I love us." "Me too." On their anniversary, they didn't go to church or have a party. They just spent the day together on the ranch, working side by side, comfortable in the life they'd built. That evening, they sat on the porch and watched the sunset paint the mountains the same colors they'd been exactly 1 year ago. "Do you ever think about what your life would be like if you hadn't agreed to marry me?" Clara asked. "Sometimes I'd probably still be alone up here, still grieving, still half alive instead of actually living. Do you think we would have met some other way?" "I don't know. Maybe. Maybe not." Boone took her hand. "But I'm glad we met the way we did, even though it was hard, even though it started with lies and desperation. 'Cause it led us here, to this porch, to this life, this partnership, this love." Clara leaned her head on his shoulder, watching the light fade. "I'm glad too, even with everything, all the pain and fear and struggle. I'm glad. Because it was worth it. Because I'm worth it. And so are you. And together, we're building something neither of us could have built alone." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out, one by one, filling the sky with light. Clara thought about the journey she'd taken, from that frozen church to this warm porch, from shame to strength, from being lost to being found, not by Boone, though he'd helped, by herself. She'd found herself in the quiet mornings and the hard work, in the boundaries she'd learned to set and the worth she'd learned to claim. She'd found herself in choosing to stay, choosing to love, choosing to build a life on her own terms. And that, Clara thought, was the real victory, not escaping her old life, not even building this new one, but discovering that she'd always had the strength to choose. She just hadn't known it. "What are you thinking about?" Boone asked. "That a year ago I stood in a church convinced my life was over, that I was being sold and discarded and my only value was in fixing other people's problems. And now? Now I know better. Now I know I was never the problem. I was just surrounded by people who needed me to be small so they could feel big. That's the truth. And the best revenge isn't holding grudges or staying angry. It's building a life so good they can't touch it. Boone pulled her closer. Is that what we're doing? Yeah, I think it is. They stayed on the porch until the cold drove them inside, then spent the night wrapped in each other's arms in the bed Boone had built. And when Clara woke the next morning to mountain sunlight and the sound of Boone making coffee downstairs, she felt something she'd been chasing her whole life without knowing it. Home, not the place, the feeling. The deep, unshakable knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged, with exactly who she was meant to be with, living exactly the life she'd chosen. Winter came early that year, the first snow falling in mid-November, but Clara wasn't afraid of it anymore. She'd survived one mountain winter. She could survive another, and another after that. For as long as she and Boone chose to keep building this life together, she would face whatever came with strength she'd earned and love she'd chosen. 'Cause that was the thing about second chances, Clara had learned. They weren't given, they were taken. She'd taken hers with both hands and refused to let go, even when it was hard, even when it hurt. And now she stood on the other side of that choice with a home, a partner, and most importantly, herself. Whole, free, hers. And that was worth everything she'd gone through to get here.